Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks for the blessings which have been bestowed on us. Laying aside all personal interests, we acknowledge the King and pray for guidance in our deliberations, that we may conduct the affairs of this House with wisdom, justice, mercy and humility, for the welfare and peace of New Zealand. Amen.
I'm sure members would wish to welcome Janelle Saffin, member of the New South Wales Legislative Assembly, who is present in the gallery. The Honourable Simeon Brown.
Mr Speaker, next week in the House we will consider further stages of the climate change response, emissions trading scheme agricultural obligations amendment bill and the building earthquake-prone building deadlines and other matters amendment bill. On Tuesday, the House will sit at 11:30 a.m. for the delivery of the Crown apology to survivors of abuse in care, and at 2 p.m. we will have the first reading of the Responding to Abuse in Care legislation amendment bill. Following that, the House will adjourn for the rest of the day. On Thursday, we will have the first reading of the Principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill.
The Honourable Karen McAnulty.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the Acting Leader of the House for that statement. Will the Government consider moving an instruction to the Committee to report the Treaty Principles Bill back to Parliament immediately, given there is no requirement in the Coalition Agreement for a full Select Committee process, and if not, why not?
Mr Speaker, that question was put, I think, to the Prime Minister yesterday, and as Prime Minister said, the bill will have a full Select Committee.
Petitions have been presented. Oh, no petitions have been delivered to the Clerk. Ministers have delivered 4 papers for presentation.
2023-24 annual reports for the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra and Auckland Light Rail Limited, Statement of Performance Expectations and Statement of Intent for New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, Climate Change Commission, Report on the Potential Domestic Contribution to Aotearoa New Zealand's second nationally determined contribution.
I present the report of the Controller and Auditor General titled Assessing New Zealand's Climate Change Response with a Climate Scanner. Those papers are published under the authority of the House. Select Committee reports have been delivered for presentation.
Report of the Social Services and Community Committee on the Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill.
The bill is set down for second reading. The Clerk has been informed of the introduction of 3 bills.
Principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill, Introduction. Employment Relations, Termination of Employment by Agreement Amendment Bill, Introduction. Copyright, Parody and Satire Amendment Bill, Introduction.
Those bills are set down. Point of order.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to move a motion without notice and without debate that this House honours the Tiriti o Waitangi and withdraws the Treaty Principles Bill.
Sorry, could you... I didn't hear what you said. You need to say it just slightly slowly, and just bear in mind that until I call it, no bills are tabled at this point.
Can I continue?
Yeah.
I seek leave to move a motion without notice and without debate that this House honours the Tiriti o Waitangi and withdraws the Treaty Principles Bill.
Leave is sought. Is there any objection? Yes. There appears to be objection. Those bills are set down for first reading. Come now to point of order. Deputy Ngāore Wapaka.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. According to Standing Order 116, the House must take into account the constitutional relationship between the legislative and judicial branches of government. The Treaty Principles Bill being proposed violates this constitutional relationship by overriding decades of judicial decisions.
Well, there's 2 points here. Firstly, there is obviously long-standing convention around that particular provision, but the position that you're putting to me today is very much an opinion and not something that the House can act on or that I can act on. We come now to oral questions. First,
Speaker.
Point of order, Rauri Waititi.
Speaking to the point of order, the Treaty Principles Bill also violates the constitutional relationship between the Crown and Māori and undermines the legitimacy of this House.
Well, that might be... I'll tell you what, the next person who calls out like that will be asked to leave. This is obviously an important matter, and it's fair that you raise as many points that you want to, but the reality is that this is a bill that is set down for first reading and is not in contravention of what the House may do.
Order, Mr Speaker. Speaking, the introduction of the Treaty Principles Bill without consulting the Governor-General is a violation of Standing Order 119, as it is disrespectful to the King's representative.
Well, the member who's raising that clearly forgets what was in the speech from the throne at the start of the government's term late last year. I would suggest that these points of order need to come to a conclusion fairly swiftly.
Order.
No, you're not speaking. I've ruled on it.
Point of order. New point of order.
All right.
The introduction of the Treaty Principles Bill without consulting King Charles is a sign of disrespect and brings the House into disrepute.
With respect, you're now trifling with the chair because, as I've said, when a government reads its speech from the throne at the beginning of the Parliament and mentions its intentions, that is considered to be the consultation, particularly when the Speaker takes that address down to the reply to that address, I should say, down to the Governor-General so that the Sovereign is fully aware of what's going on.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
This better be on an unrelated topic.
This is a new point of order, Mr Speaker.
It might be a new point of order, but is it a related topic?
This bill contains an example of false and misleading information that is forbidden under Standing Order 418. The articles are a complete fabrication and a bastardisation of Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
No, you cannot use the point of order process in the House to introduce debating material, and that's what that is. That is the end of this matter. That's the end of this matter. No more points of order to be taken on this. Question number one, Jenny MARCROFT.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and asks, how does the result of the recent US election affect New Zealand?
Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr Speaker, the result of every US presidential election, as in the last 100 years, has had and will have a significant impact on New Zealand, our region, and indeed the world. Donald Trump's election as the United States 47th President will be no exception. We congratulate President Trump and J.D. Vance on their election victory, and we look forward to working with them and their incoming administration. But also we acknowledge the contribution of outgoing President Joe Biden and his administration towards relations between New Zealand and the United States. The United States is one of New Zealand's closest and most important partners, and we plan to further enhance our relationship with the US and the American people over the next 4 years.
Supplementary. How does New Zealand intend to engage with the second Trump administration?
Mr Speaker, we are ready and have hit the ground running with the incoming Trump administration. This was a decision for the American people, not for us, but we have prepared for President Trump's re-election. That preparation has included ensuring we have the right people working on the New Zealand-US relationship in Washington, D.C., around the United States and back here in New Zealand.
Supplementary. How does New Zealand think the world will change in policy terms under a new administration?
As it happens, after any change of leadership, President Trump will no doubt pursue his own policy agenda. But it's important to note that President Trump will not take effect in terms of the office being sworn in until January 2025. Over the next 2.5 months, until President Trump's inauguration, the New Zealand Government will be working hard to better understand the incoming administration's policy agenda. We'll also be working on how we can best engage with the new administration on policy cooperation for the mutual benefit of both of our countries and our peoples.
Drill, baby, drill.
Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Acknowledging the successful outcome for President Trump in the USA, does the Minister see any risk to Kiwi workers and our economy from the prospect of substantial tariffs in addition to those the last Trump administration imposed on New Zealand's steel and aluminium exports, or from being, to use the Prime Minister's words, a force multiplier for the USA under Pillar 2 of AUKUS, which aims to contain China, our largest trading partner, which doesn't impose tariffs on New Zealand exporters, or from the increasing global temperatures, droughts and storm damage, which will result if the USA withdraws from climate action?
Two legs to the question.
As that member will know, we're about to re-engage with the administration, where we got right on the cusp of a free trade agreement, where he turned in front of the then Prime Minister, because of the work we'd done, and said to his team, well, why not? We missed a chance then. We don't intend to miss that chance this time.
Tiano.
Given President-elect Trump's position on foreign policy and human rights, will he commit to not joining AUKUS, and if not, why not?
The reality is that AUKUS is a work in progress with respect to Pillar 2, and that member's party was part and parcel of that arrangement, begun with a commission paper in September of 2021 under the then Labour government, a report in October 2021 on which we have worked in the same way ever since with no changes at all, so much so that the former Defence Minister Andrew Little says that we have got it about right. What's that?
No response.
Adios, amigos.
Question.
What was that? What did he say?
So I didn't hear that. What did you say?
Do you want to put the water where
Personal reflection.
Point of order.
Point of order. Just hang on. Points of order heard in silence.
This is not the first time that I am subjected to this kind of pretty overt type of behaviour, and I take personal offence to what had just occurred. And note that it is incredibly unstatesmanlike from the Deputy Prime Minister, the Acting Prime Minister.
Speaking to point of order.
Cannot have these members.
Wait on.
We cannot.
Just keep everything quiet. Everyone hears points of order in silence.
We cannot have these members so sensitive. All I said in Spanish was, goodbye, my friend. But he's offended by that. Now, for goodness sake, we have a very diverse parliament.
What, Mr. Speaker? When the House goes quiet, and let me assure people that although it's been 12 months that I've been in the chair nearly, and no one's been asked to leave the House, it's very close. Do not make it interjections or other reactions to points of order. Steve Abel.
In the context of the election result in the United States, which was heavily predicated on extreme actions against the Mexican people on the southern border of the United States, I think the comment by the Deputy Prime Minister is particularly pernicious.
Nothing of the sort was intended, nor, as the member would have found out if he had studied very closely the closing polls in the United States, did the Latino vote change, and rather it went the other way, it went towards Trump.
I think we'll just let that matter lie, but those sort of comments generally should be resisted. Debbie Nauru-Packer.
Kia ora, i te pika. How can the government go into a relationship with a president who has actively promoted and deliberately supported the genocide of a people in Palestine?
Look,
Speaker, could I say I have no intention. I have no intention of answering a question made so malignantly as that without any shred of evidence whatsoever. This country's foreign policy and our future economic well-being and Pacific well-being depends on better thinking than that.
Just as members need to be aware that just as it is inappropriate for ministers to make accusations in answers, it is also inappropriate to make accusations in questions. Question number 3, the Honourable Julie Anne Genterer.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker.
Number 2.
My question is to the Minister of Finance. What advice, if any, did she receive on the potential impacts on the cost of moving freight by rail between the North Island and the South Island before announcing the cancellation of the order for rail-enabled ferries?
The Honourable Nicola Willis.
Mr. Speaker, the question reflects some misunderstanding on the part of the member. Ministers received several pieces of advice about various aspects of Project IREX before Cabinet decided in December last year to not meet KiwiRail's request for further funding for the project. The advice we received has been proactively released and is on the Treasury website. The advice focuses on the efficiency of the transport system as opposed to the specific cost of freight. The Minister's assessment was that Project IREX was inherently flawed, with large cost blowouts for landside infrastructure, and the project needed to be reset.
Did she receive any advice on the fiscal impacts of adding thousands of trucks to the road as a result of not having rail-enabled ferries, as has been indicated by the Managing Director of Main Freight, will be the result of not having rail-enabled ferries, before announcing the cancellation of the order?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that question is littered with assumptions, many of which are completely wrong.
Mr. Speaker, could the Minister please tell me which of the statements that were made in the previous question are erroneous assumptions, as she claims?
Well, I'll start with the assumption that there would be more freight going on trucks. That's a big assumption.
Mr. Speaker.
Quiet.
Does the Minister therefore think that Managing Director of Main Freight, our largest freight operator in the country, is wrong or is lying when he says that his company will put at least 5,000 additional truck and trailer movements on the roads as a result of the loss of rail-enabled ferries?
Well, I've had many conversations with a range of people involved in getting freight across the country, including Don Braid from Main Freight. And what he would reflect to the member is that decisions have not been made by Cabinet on what kind of ferries there will be or what the arrangements for freight would be. So it's very premature to be making those sorts of assessments.
Point of order, the Honourable Change.
Sir, I want us to return to a point I made yesterday, Speaker's Rulings 192. We've got further evidence of these wild and indiscriminate claims being attributed without decent evidence that the said person actually made those statements in that context. That's
worthwhile.
Point of order.
Oh, are you a point of order or are you speaking to a point of order?
Well, speaking to the point of order, would I be able to table the quote from Don Braid where he literally says what I just said in response to the Minister's accusation that it's an unfounded misquote?
You can seek leave for that after I've dealt with the point of order. Firstly, members should be aware of those two provisions that were discussed yesterday in relation to questions. Those provisions also apply to answers. Do you now wish to seek leave of the House?
Point of order. I seek leave of the House to table an article which quotes Don Braid saying that there will be 5,000 additional truck and trailer movements, at least from his company, if there is not rail-enabled ferries.
And where was the article published?
On Radio New Zealand.
I think that's publicly available. So,
point of order, Mr. Speaker. In the Minister's last few responses, she said no decisions have been taken. However, my question was, had she asked for or received advice on these issues before taking a decision that led to the announcement of the cancellation of the ferries?
Yeah, The point is that you've asked a question in two different ways. I'd ask the member to think carefully about the way the question is structured, because the way the Minister has answered is appropriate to the way the question was asked. You're welcome to look at Hansard's to work out what I'm saying. But please, if you've got another supplementary, ask it now.
Supplementary. Does she think government should review all the evidence about the costs, benefits, and impacts of infrastructure decisions before cancelling or announcing projects?
Mr. Speaker, when an infrastructure project changes from being an investment in ships that is expected to cost less than $1 billion into an investment that is expected to cost at least $3 billion, 80% of which are costs for portside infrastructure and not ships, when a project has consistent blowouts and when a previous government chooses to ignore those, then yes, when a new government is elected, it needs to take action.
Supplementary. Why has she considered that $3 billion for this IREX project, which had a business case and clear strategic value of retaining a rail connection between the North and South Island, was unaffordable, but yesterday has committed to at least $3 billion to add less than 2 kilometres of one car lane in each direction in central Wellington before an investment case has even begun?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the member for Rongotai wishes to tell the people of Miramar that they don't deserve a duplicate Mount Vic tunnel, that they should sit in traffic, that their buses should go slowly, that they should have an adequate ability to cycle through the tunnel to get to work, then she is welcome to go and campaign on her commitment to get rid of the second tunnel. Good luck.
I should have ruled that. The House will go into silence. I should have ruled that question out because excuse me, because it doesn't relate to the primary question, quite simply. I'm not going to have an argument with you, and I'd suggest you don't have an argument with me. The Honourable Barbara Edmonds, question 3.
Tēnā koe te mana whakawā. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does she stand by all her statements and actions?
Mr. Speaker, yes, and in particular I stand by the statement I made yesterday, which was that today's unemployment statistic is yet another reminder of how letting inflation get a grip on the economy was so damaging. I wonder if the member agrees with that statement.
Supplementary. Is it a good use of taxpayer funds to support a piece of proposed legislation that will not proceed past the select committee stage but will cost the country more in racial disharmony?
Mr. Speaker, legislation progresses to the House a number of ways. There are, for example, a number of members' bills that I would not wish to progress, but it is important for democracy that legislation can come to the House.
Okay, that's enough of the loud barracking. Rare and reasonable interjection is fair enough, but not that. Barbara Edmonds.
Is it important to democracy to support a piece of proposed legislation that will have a cost to racial disharmony and will not proceed anywhere past to second reading?
I am struggling to see what responsibility I have for that question as the Minister of Finance.
You're wasting money. Supplementary. Does she stand by her statement regarding the Inter-Islander ferries from 6 weeks ago that, quote, "we will ensure that we will make an announcement shortly," unquote, and if so, when is shortly?
Yes, it'll be this year.
Supplementary. Isn't it the case that regardless of what option is progressed, the Picton Wharf and terminal will be required to be rebuilt?
Yes.
Why did she prematurely decide to cancel the Hyundai Ferries contract when what she should have done is sought options for the portside infrastructure instead?
Mr. Speaker, there's a couple of things going on here. The first thing is the member is making some presumptions around the Cook Strait solution that the government will come to. What she is right to assume is that that would require some portside infrastructure. There are a couple of relevant facts. One is that the infrastructure at Centreport and the infrastructure in Picton may require upgrades in the future. There are, of course, a number of options available to the government. There are a number of people who use port infrastructure. There are a number of ways in which Cook Strait ferries can be arranged. And so it is not helpful for me to address hypotheticals such as those that the member is presenting.
Question number 4, Dr Hamish Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. What recent reports has she seen on the government's fiscal position?
The Honourable Nicola Willis.
Well, Mr Speaker, I have released today the financial statements of the government for the first quarter of the financial year. In fact, they were released by Treasury. The statements detail Crown revenue and expenditure for the 3 months to 30 September and update the operating balance before gains and losses and the Crown's debt position.
Supplementary. What did the financial statements show?
Mr Speaker, the statements show core Crown revenue in the first 3 months of the year totaled $32.3 billion and core Crown expenses totaled $34.9 billion. Those numbers are broadly in line with Treasury's last set of forecasts made for the budget in May. However, the Obergall deficit was $700 million larger than forecast at $4.2 billion for the quarter, and net core Crown debt was also $700 million larger than forecast at $177.6 billion.
Supplementary. Why was the Obergall deficit larger than forecast?
Mr Speaker, the increase is mostly attributable to the performance of Crown entities. The results do show that the government has slowed the growth of government expenditure. However, they also show that it is going to take time to deal with the additional costs that have been baked into the system by the previous government. And these include, Mr Speaker, the cost of servicing the additional debt incurred between 2017 and 2023. That extra debt amounts to $118 billion.
Shane.
$118 billion, which for the members' knowledge is the equivalent of $22,000 for every person in New Zealand. And in light of this, Mr Speaker, I note a statement made on Radio New Zealand today from a member who said that's why we're calling on the government strongly to get the economy...
Point of order, the Honourable Kira McAnulty.
Mr Speaker, the fact that the Minister continued to, with that quote after you had called me for a point of order makes my point, is that the first part of that comment was marginal. The second part is clearly in breach. This is a question from her own member. It seems like we have to go through this point with this Minister almost every sitting week. These questions should not be used to make a political point at the opposition's expense. Facts and opinion are completely different.
Well, there are parts of your point of order that I would accept. The last part is not quite so easily acceptable. But the answer is far too long for a government question. We'll try another one. Dr Hamish Campbell.
Supplementary. How is the government going to get the books back in balance?
Well, Mr Speaker, today's result does reinforce the need to maintain careful spending, get better value for money and drive economic growth. Driving growth is a really important part of the equation. If we not only want to get the books back in order but lift living standards, we need to grow the economy faster. And unlike our predecessors, the government understands that it is business that creates jobs.
No, look, sorry, that probably does illustrate the point that was being made by Mr McAnulty. Question number 3, Ricardo Mendes-March. Number 5.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Child Poverty Reduction and asks, what policies of this government, if any, risk increasing material hardship and child poverty?
The Honourable Louise Upson.
Mr Speaker, our government is focused on reducing material hardship and lifting children out of poverty. That's why we made significant investments in Budget 24 with policies that support families experiencing hardship, including tax relief,
family boost and increasing the in-work tax credit. Treasury modelling shows the investments in Budget 24 are estimated to lift around 17,000 children out of poverty on the after housing cost measure by 26-27. Our government is focused on practical solutions, including breaking the cycles of welfare dependency, improving educational outcomes to help keep children out of poverty in the long term. We know this approach works because during the last full 4 years of the previous National-led government, from the year 2013 to 17, the number of children in material hardship fell by 56,200.
Is it true she was advised that changes to school lunches and public transport discounts would have a negative progress towards meeting her child poverty targets?
Mr Speaker, I'm really proud of the government school lunch program because in effect what we are doing is actually providing school lunch to an additional 10,000 children that we know are struggling. Their families are struggling with food. So I'm really proud of the changes that our government has made possible to alleviate the burden for families.
Is she saying that she has received no advice indicating that several of her government's policies would lead to negative progress towards meeting her child poverty targets?
Mr Speaker, what I would say is, as I said to an answer previously to that member, ministers receive advice and then further advice, and the further advice and what the government actually announced around ka ora, ka ako will absolutely buffer families who are currently experiencing challenges putting food on the table, and in fact our government has found a way to make it possible to ensure that 10,000 additional children receive the school lunch program.
Does she accept that this government's actions are contributing to the 2028 child poverty reduction targets becoming increasingly unachievable because of their multiple policies locking more children into poverty?
Mr Speaker, I absolutely disagree with that. Our government has been clearly focused on dealing with the cost of living crisis, growing the economy, improving things like school attendance and school achievement, which we know contribute to the long-term impacts and effects for children, which is why we've got targets in these areas.
How can she disagree with the previous question, which she has been advised that several of her government's policies would negatively contribute to meeting her child poverty reduction targets?
Because, Mr Speaker, as I said in my primary answer, I'm proud of Budget 2024, which will lift 17,000 children out of poverty. We saw 6 years of the previous government, material hardship went up by 4,100 when it was supposedly the priority.
Question number 6, the Honourable Dr Aotearoa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Associate Minister of Health and asks, does she stand by her statement that, quote, once my office was fully staffed, operational issues regarding management of information was remedied, end quote, and if so, how was she unaware until yesterday that she never released an unredacted version of the document to the requester?
The Honourable Casey Costello.
Mr Speaker, yes. I reject the member's assertion that I was unaware an unredacted version had not been released because she has mischaracterised my personal explanation from yesterday. And I would point out that while the member continues to fixate on old news and trying to find links where there aren't any, this government is getting on with actually supporting smokers to quit cigarettes through practical tools and approaches. Contrary to the previous government's approach, I am interested in the views of frontline quit smoking providers who understand the challenges for long-term addicted smokers rather than implementing headline-catching, misdirected slogans.
Supplementary. Does she stand by the decision she made to redact the phrases nicotine is as harmful as caffeine and that tobacco control measures amount to nanny-state nonsense?
Mr Speaker, the Official Information Act provides for withholding information to maintain the effective conduct of public affairs through the free and frank expression of opinions. I have been clear in this House that the document in question refers to statements, policies and positions of the New Zealand First Party, and when given by a minister to officials, it is not unreasonable to think that there are free and frank statements within it as well as public policy positions that are under active consideration.
Supplementary. Does she understand now that she withheld that information under a section of the Act that only applies to information tendered by officials? And if so, she should be able to say who wrote it or who gave her that document.
Mr. Speaker, I have not received any notice about a complaint being made about information released. The member could speculate about anything but has no grounds for the assertion. I note that if the member were concerned about redactions, the information received by her in March this year, and no complaint has been made as far as I'm aware.
Supplementary.
One more. Yeah. Dr. Aotearoa.
Why did she claim on Tuesday that her acting contrary to the law was the result of short-term operational issues, when the fact is she continued to inappropriately withhold information while being under investigation by the Ombudsman well into June?
Mr. Speaker, yet again, I have not received a complaint in relation to the document in question, so the member can make the assertion, but frankly, she is not qualified to make that assessment. There is active consideration, as she's fully aware, around the Official Information Act management.
Right, many questions. Could the Minister please explain to the original questioner very slowly that one requester already had an unredacted copy which was leaked to him and no doubt her?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this whole issue arose from a leaked document for which the Ministry has offered apologies.
Supplementary. Does she understand that whether there's an Ombudsman's complaint or not, she needs to be able to explain the decisions she made according to the Act?
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, yes, all of the explanations around redaction have been made. There is active consideration around policy positions which is covered for under the Official Information Act, and that has been fully responded to.
Something questions.
Peters.
Can I ask the Minister as to whether or not in this inquiry she expects to get the information from the original questioner that she had already received an unredacted copy, and what is all this nonsense therefore about?
Mr. Speaker, what I can say is I apologise to New Zealanders who are trying to give up smoking and are being distracted by an opposition who has absolutely no ability to understand what important work needs to be undertaken. The previous government failed to deliver a proper, effective policy position, and we are fixing it.
Supplementary. So this week, are we going to have that sort of theatrics? Or are we going to have what we had last week?
Just ask a question.
Is she going to continue to blame everyone but herself? Officials, the opposition, the media, or will she fess up and just say how the document ended up in her office?
Fair question.
Mr. Speaker, could I have the question again because I missed it with the noise?
I think a fair warning has been given to the House about people making a noise or whatever during a question being asked. So just don't push it any further. Would Dr. Aotearoa please ask that question again?
Is she going to continue blaming everyone but herself, officials, the opposition, the media, or will she fess up and just say how the document ended up in her office?
Pretty straight.
Mr. Speaker, this topic has been fully traversed. I have explained repeatedly to this House where the document came from. I'm not sure what the mystery is to the member. She has not made any concerns about the redacted version she's received.
Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Can I ask the Minister, has she been able to work out, her department, reformed as it now is, been able to work out why on earth you would be trying to seek a redacted copy when you've already got an unredacted one?
Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, yes, she does.
Mr. Speaker, I again would reflect on the fact that this issue is about some advice that was being used to form policy positions. There is a big program of work working forward, and I hope that when the next legislation comes to the House around vaping controls, that we will get support across the House to introduce proper policy positions.
Supplementary.
Dr. Verrill.
How has she continued to find herself trapped in a web of her self-contradictions, And how does that reflect on her ability to manage her portfolios in a way that benefits the New Zealand public?
Point of order, the right honourable Mr.
Speaker, you cannot open with a statement like that and expect it to be a satisfactory parliamentary question. I mean, with great respect, and you're a most experienced person, she should have been stopped in her tracks and asked to get some advice about how you conduct yourself in Parliament when it comes to question time.
Speaking to the point of order.
Just, okay, you can speak to the point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister that is being questioned has, on at least 2 occasions, had to correct responses to a number of questions that Dr Aotearoa has asked her. They themselves are contradictions. And so it is entirely appropriate, reflecting on the scope of the question and the history leading up to it, to use that phrase in a question.
There's nothing wrong with using the phrase about there being contradictions, but there is a problem with the further descriptors that were put around that. Dr Aotearoa might like to ask the question in a way that brings it into order.
How has she found herself needing to apologise again for her self-contradictions in the House? And how does that reflect on her ability to be a minister in the New Zealand government?
Mr. Speaker, I reject the assertions in that question. I did not apologise yesterday. I sought to leave to make a clarification correction of what was said.
Question number 7, Suze Redmayne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bit of quiet while we've got the question going on.
My question is to the Minister of Health. What recent announcements has the government made about improving access to breast cancer screening for New Zealand women?
Dr Shane Reddy.
Mr. Speaker, last week the government announced that free breast screening is being extended for 70 to 74-year-old women starting in the Nelson Marlborough district ahead of a national rollout late next year. This is something that has been called for over many years. The aim of breast screening is to find breast cancers early before there are any noticeable signs and symptoms, with early detection improving management options and outcomes. We know that breast cancer is one of the most common cancers in New Zealand, with about 3,400 women diagnosed with the disease each year. So, extending screening can save lives. That is why this initiative is a priority for our government.
Supplementary. What does this age extension mean for New Zealand women?
Mr. Speaker, this age extension could potentially save 22 lives per year. That's not just 22 women, but also their families, friends and loved ones who won't have to endure the attendant impact of cancer. Data shows that women who participate in the Breast Screen Aotearoa program are 34% less likely to die from breast cancer. Increasing access through this age extension allows us to catch more cancers early, which means better treatment outcomes. We'll also be looking to improve the outcomes for women such as the more than 60 women who succumbed in this age group in the latest data 2019.
Supplementary. How will this scheme be deployed across the country?
Mr. Speaker, extending breast screening to an approximately 60,000 additional eligible women per year takes an immense amount of planning, including investment in workforce and a physical infrastructure. I want to thank everyone involved for their efforts to date, and I look forward to seeing this program rolled out nationwide next year. Early detection will save lives.
Supplementary. What other actions has the government taken to improve outcomes for New Zealanders with cancer?
Mr. Speaker, this extension of breast screening is just one action we've taken for better cancer care. We've also introduced a target for faster cancer treatment, increased access to PET-CT scanning, expanding access to life-extending cancer medicines through our transformative $604 million investment in Pharmac, and started building a new cancer radiotherapy machine at Whangarei Hospital. We remain committed to improving outcomes for the thousands of Kiwis and their families affected by cancer each year.
Order.
A point of order. The Honourable Dr Aotearoa.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't want to interrupt the important matter discussed in the last question, but I have a point of order relating to question number 6. In the exchange for the last supplementary, the Minister stated that she did not apologise yesterday, but in fact I have now found here the Hansard of her statement, and it concludes, and I apologise for any confusion to the House.
Okay, thank you for that. Honourable Kira McAnulty, question 8.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Associate Minister of Housing, Social Housing. Does he stand by his statement that, quote, "I'm not worried that some are now homeless," end quote, regarding people who have left emergency housing? If so, why?
The Honourable Tama Potaka.
This was a similar question asked by the Honourable Willie Jackson in August
And as I said then, as I will now, the member mischaracterised the context in which the comments were made around the government's Priority 1 fast track to get whānau with tamariki who'd been staying longer than 12 weeks in emergency housing out of that moral, financial, cultural and social catastrophe. The question asked, I'm not worried that some are now homeless. My answer is that none of the 726 households and 1,452 tamariki living in emergency housing and transitioned through Priority 1 by 30 September 2024 into social housing were homeless when placed. Every single one of those 1,452 children were placed into warm, dry homes. Supplementary. When he says he is worried about emergency housing numbers, but isn't worried that some are now homeless, end quote, isn't he just saying that all he's really worried about is reducing costs? This government has a target number 8, to reduce the number of households living in emergency by 75% by 2030. We are up to 62% in 9 months. And the member may use chicanery and innuendo to try and trap me into an answer, but I will repeat in this House that we are absolutely dedicated to ensure that those with genuine need for short-term stay and temporary accommodation in most urban and city centres in New Zealand can access that. But we have been absolutely committed to ensure that many thousands of tamariki living in that catastrophe move into warm, dry homes. Supplementary. How can he credibly claim this policy is a success when his official advice was that these changes to entry criteria for emergency housing would increase homelessness, and when asked why 20% of people that have left emergency housing are now homeless, his response was, quote, "I'm not worried," end quote. Again, the member uses fuzzy math to describe the actual situation. The actual situation is when we arrived, we knew where around 50% of those leaving and exiting emergency housing were going to. Now, through the dedicated diligence and professionalism of our officials and, of course, the ministers who are involved with housing, we know where nearly 80% of people are going to when they exit. The other 20% we may not know because it's not required of people leaving emergency housing to actually tell officials where they're going to. Supplementary. One more here. How many people have been declined emergency housing since he changed the entry criteria? That is a written question that the member can send to my office, but what I can say is that by September, over 2,000 tamariki had left emergency housing in the 9 months to date.
Supplementary.
Honourable Nicola Willis.
Can the Minister confirm that in recent years, thousands of New Zealand children have been brought up in motel rooms, often with gang members living next door, in circumstances that were by nature transitory, and today thousands fewer children are living in those circumstances?
I'll allow the question, but it needs to be succinct.
I can confirm that, and I can also confirm when we arrived we were spending around $1 million a day in emergency housing, now it's less than $500,000.
It's the real reason.
Supplementary.
Yep, when the House gathers itself.
How many people have been moved into social or community housing paid for and built by this government? It's again, I can reiterate and respond to the member again who asked a very similar question last week, that social housing has been built by a number of governments over the years, and those people that have moved into those social houses built by a number of governments over many years are very, very comfortable. What I can also say is this, is that there continues to be availability for emergency housing for those with genuine need for short-term stay and temporary accommodation in most urban centres in this country.
The honourable point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister responded to a pretty straight question with a statement that referred to past governments. He did not respond to the straight question about this government. He should have another go.
Well, thank you for giving me the direction as to how I should proceed on this, but I think it's not unreasonable that he makes the point that since 1938, a number of governments have built social housing in New Zealand. The Honourable Nicola Willis.
In light of the implication of the questions from the member opposite, is it the Minister's view that it would be a sign of success if there were more New Zealanders living in emergency motel rooms?
Te Māngai te whare, it will not be a sign of success, and that's why I'm very proud, along with my ministerial and caucus colleagues, that we have seen thousands of people leave emergency housing in the last 9 months.
Supplementary. Kieran McAnulty.
Thank you, sir.
Kieran McAnulty.
Isn't it actually the case that any people that are now housed are in houses funded and built not by this government, but by the previous Labor government? And
the question is going to be started again because we listen in silence to people's questions.
Thank you, sir. Isn't it actually the case that any people that are now housed are housed in homes built and paid for by the previous Labor government, and the decrease in emergency housing numbers is...
A point of order, the right honourable Winston
Mr. Speaker, the question begins, isn't it actually the case? It's not a question, it's a statement. And members are asked here to come to Parliament to ask questions properly, not to make a statement and ask for somebody to confirm it or otherwise. That is not how questions are framed here. And they should know it after all this time they've been here.
Yes, I do recall the Right Honourable Jonathan Hunt sitting in this chair making that very point with a minister who was part of a coalition government at the time. And I think where it ended up was that it depends on the context of where it goes from there. So the minister's point is essentially correct. But the judgment is how the question ends up, and that's why we need to listen carefully to the whole question. But if the member might like to think about the way he asks that question, would be helpful.
I'm all for the order of the House, sir, so I'll have another crack.
There's no need for you to make those sort of, self-aggrandising comments.
I apologise for taking your lead, sir.
Yes, you're looking for an Ely flight. Or...
No, I'm not. Supplementary. Is it not the case that any people that are now homed from emergency housing are in homes funded and built by the previous Labor government, and the decrease in emergency housing numbers is because he and his change in criteria is stopping people getting into emergency housing in the first place? He te māngai te whare. It is the case that the taxpayers of Aotearoa, New Zealand have paid for social housing that has been built by a number of governments over time. And just to add this, that in the event that the member has been ever involved in building houses before, I think it would be pretty incredible for you to buy the land, plan the house, get the funding support and go through all the regulatory molasses to build a house within 9 months.
Question number 9, Tim van der Molen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of
Just a minute,
Police.
Mr van der Molen. His own side needs to gather itself, it would appear. Okay.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister of Police. What recent reports has he seen on the policing of gangs?
Mr. Speaker,
Mark Mitchell.
Yesterday, this comes in advance of an event they're organising in Canterbury this week. Police are prepared for this event and have been working to prevent it disrupting members of the public going about their lawful business.
Supplementary. What steps is police taking to disrupt gang events?
Police will be working to ensure the maintenance of law during the Mongols event this week. They're also working closely with Immigration New Zealand to prevent international members of the gang entering New Zealand to celebrate and glorify their criminal activity.
Supplementary. Why is the government working to prevent Mongols gang members entering New Zealand?
By placing border alerts and suspending visa waiver status on known Mongols members, the government is sending a clear message that they are not welcome in New Zealand for a celebration of their criminal behaviour. This government does not tolerate gangs and the misery that they peddle, and refuses to allow others to come into our country and glorify that misery.
Supplementary. What does he say to recent rhetoric around police operations cracking down on gangs?
Police have done an outstanding job on a 10-month operation across the North Island, and in particular targeting the mongrel mob barbarians for drug dealing, possession of illegal weapons and planning hit jobs. We are lucky in this country to have a world-class police service, deeply connected to the communities that they serve, and who take their responsibility of keeping Kiwis safe seriously.
Question number 10, Laura Trask.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Associate Minister of Justice, what recent reports, if any, has she seen in relation to anti-money laundering and countering terrorism financing regulations?
The Honourable Nicole McKee.
Business New Zealand recently released a report reducing compliance burden on New Zealand small businesses. The report highlights that the current anti-money laundering law places an unnecessary burden on small businesses. It points to repetitive information requests, too many procedural steps, inconsistent requirements, excessive costs, and a lack of coordination in the system as serious issues weighing heavily on small business productivity.
Supplementary. What work is currently underway to address the issues raised in that report?
Mr. Speaker, the first phase of my anti-money laundering reforms has taken initial steps to address some of the concerns Business New Zealand has raised. This work will consolidate the three current regulators, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, the Financial Markets Authority and the Department of Internal Affairs, into a single regulatory body under the Department of Internal Affairs. This consolidation will cut red tape, streamline processes and reduce the high compliance costs that the report identifies as obstacles for small businesses.
Supplementary. How does the Minister's three-phase work programme address specific recommendations from the Business New Zealand report on anti-money laundering?
My three-phase work programme directly addresses the recommendations to simplify and streamline AML processes. Through the Statutes Amendment Bill, which is currently before the House, I am introducing immediate relief that targets the report's call for straightforward compliance. Moving to a single AML supervisor will also ensure that clear, consistent guidelines is available for small businesses, allowing them to meet compliance standards more efficiently without having to jump through the unnecessary regulatory hoops.
Supplementary. Will the Minister focus on simplifying customer due diligence to address the report's specific recommendations?
Mr. Speaker, yes. Businesses have highlighted excessive customer due diligence as a primary challenge for small business. I am addressing this directly through the adoption of a risk-based approach in the first and third phases of my reform programme. By streamlining these due diligence requirements, I am to reduce compliance costs and improve productivity for small businesses, allowing them to operate more freely and contribute to New Zealand's economic growth.
Question number 11, the Honourable Penny Henare.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. My question is to the Minister for Māori Crown Relations, Te Arawhiti. Does he stand by all the government's statements and actions?
Honourable Tamapota.
It's mai o te whare. Yes, Anna, particularly the resolution between three kura haupo iwi in the top of the South Island, Te Tauhu o Te Wakoa Maui, who have received $25 million in alternative redress after the Woodburn Airport could not be transferred to them because of PFAS or chemical poisoning under the land.
Supplementary. Does he stand by the government's action to introduce the Treaty Principles Bill earlier than expected? And if so, what does he say to iwi leaders who have described this as, quote, dishonourable and reckless, end quote, and if not, why not?
Te maanga o te whare. I stand by the Government's and Cabinet's decision to introduce the Treaty Principles Bill, and I recognise and acknowledge the genuine concerns expressed by iwi leaders.
Supplementary. Is Rahui Papa correct when he said, quote, get rid of the Māori bashing, racist bills, policies and procedures of this government, end quote, If not, why not?
E te maanga o te whare. Kei a rāhui papa tōna ke piki amakura.
Supplementary.
Wait for the...
Who have left emergency housing.
Hold on. Just ask the House to be quiet. That was ridiculous, amount of barracking there. The Minister can start his answer again and people will be very restrained.
E te maanga o te whare. My view is that the Māori-Crown relationship has been supported by the number of tamariki Māori who have left emergency housing, by the additional funding that has been given to Matatini, and by the absolute focus of the Minister of Education towards structured literacy, structured maths, structured education amongst many kura and schools throughout this country.
Supplementary.
No, we're going to hear the answer again and the House is going to be silent for the whole of the answer.
E te maanga o te whare. My view is that the Māori-Crown relationship has been strengthened by the number of tamariki Māori that have been...
Sorry, just a moment. Just a moment. If there are noises coming from the gallery, then the gallery will be cleared. We're just going to hear the answer in silence from both the House and the gallery.
It's a maanga o te whare. There are a number of matters that I believe have strengthened the Māori-Crown relationship. For example, the recent resolution between three kurahopo iwi and the Crown in relation to the Woodburn Airport redress. For example, the additional $50 million that have been given to Matatini to further our commitment to culture and language. For example, the structured literacy and structured maths efforts that the Minister of Education, Minister Stanford, has engendered through the education system.
What was the instruction to the House? It was not the gallery at all.
Point of order. Point of order.
The member may finish his answer first.
A number of matters that have strengthened the Māori-Crown relationship.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Simeon Brown.
You are very clear in your instructions to the House and the gallery in relation to that question, and there were a number of members on the other side who continued to speak and interject, and there seems to be no consequences.
Well, that's a very sharp observation. There were three people who were speaking during that time. I know who those people are. And that obviously will have some consequence down the track. Penny Henare.
To the Minister, why has he prioritised cutting jobs at Te Arawhiti, whose primary role is to help make the Crown a better treaty partner, when iwi leaders are speaking out against his government's anti-Māori agenda?
E te maanga o te whare. As we are all aware, this government is very focused on delivering better public services. Any matters in relation to jobs and employment are operational matters and will be left at the appropriate operational levels.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, will he commit to fronting up on the forecourt of Parliament to listen to the tens of thousands of New Zealanders who will march against his government's anti-Māori agenda?
E te maanga o te whare. The hikoi in question is very important for many, many people. As the Minister of Māori-Crown Relations, I have a number of responsibilities that I have to attend to here and in many other places throughout the country, including, for example, resolving some of the issues that were left extant by the previous government. However, the first step is to get to the weekend.
Question 12, Joseph Mooney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Conservation. What recent announcements has he made about conservation matters?
It's maanga o te whare. Thank you. I recently had the pleasure of celebrating the opening of New Zealand's 11th Great Walk, the Tuatapere Hump Track, and revealing the exemplary Waharoa carved by Steve Solomon. The Hump Track is steeped in cultural and historical significance, and its Great Walk status will make it more of a draw card for both Aotearoa New Zealanders and international manuhiri. This is a great example of Te Papa Atawhai collaborating with iwi, the local Hump Ridge Trust and local government to bring a conservation project to life and brings benefits to local businesses and the economy.
Supplementary. What priorities does the Minister have for conservation?
Te Maunga o Te Whare, I've established 4 clear priorities for conservation: targeting investment into high-value conservation domains, generating revenue and recalibrating costs so we can ensure to focus on delivering better public services with conservation, strengthening relationship with iwi, hapu and other communities to achieve shared goals, and reducing red and green tape to make it easier for businesses and others to undertake mahi on public conservation lands. We're getting things done for conservation.
How is the Department of Conservation partnering with iwi to enrich visitor experiences?
It's Te Maunga o Te Whare. Last week I had the pleasure of attending the blessing for an outstanding new Pou Whenua of Te Ririro, the tupuna of Ngāti Hakairo. I then attended Ohakune in the Great Rohe of Ruapehu and Rangitike to support Ngāti Rangi, who have led the opening of Te Ara Mangawhero, a new bike walk track that links in with the New Zealand cycle trail aspirations curated by the Right Honourable John Key. We also have seen the work with the people of Ngāti Hei at Motohe Cathedral Cove and the great electorate of Coromandel to ensure the track is reinstated for the summer.
Supplementary. What challenges are you seeing in conservation?
Mr Speaker, a number of challenges: weather, Cyclone Gabrielle and the tens of millions of dollars of damage done to the various assets on the conservation portfolio, pandemics and epidemics like the avian flu, not here yet but not far away, currently in South America and Antarctica, and of course generating revenue for the conservation estate. It's a work on, but we've started with increasing the international visitor levy and starting to consider other matters.
That concludes oral questions. I call on Government Orders of the Day numbers 1 to 3.
Climate Change Response, Emissions Trading Scheme, Agricultural Obligations Amendment Bill, Committee Stage. Contracts of Insurance Bill, Committee Stage continued. Building Earthquake-Prone Building Deadlines and Other Matters Amendment Bill, Committee Stage.
Those members who are leaving the House do so quietly and without conversations on the way. I declare the House in committee for consideration of those bills.
Members, the House is in committee on the Climate Change Response Emissions Trading Scheme Agricultural Obligations Amendment Bill, the Contracts of Insurance Bill and the Building Earthquake-Prone Building Deadlines and Other Matters Amendment Bill. We begin with the Climate Change Response Emissions Trading Scheme Agricultural Obligations Amendment Bill. We come first to Part 1. This is the debate on clauses 3 to 34, amendments to Climate Change Response Act 2002 to remove agricultural obligations and Schedules 1 and 2. The question is that Part 1 stand part. Honourable Simon Watts.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and it is a pleasure to be in the Committee of the Whole for this piece of legislation. This is a relatively simplistic piece of legislation. It is a repeal of certain provisions. It has two parts as part of the bill, and I will provide context in terms of the importance of that. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that New Zealand's agricultural sector is one of the most carbon efficient sectors in the world and is the backbone of the New Zealand economy. This legislation is in regards to ensuring that the emissions related to agriculture do not form part of the emissions trading scheme. It is an acknowledgement that that is not the mechanism in which is appropriate to deal with those emissions. However, under this government, we have signalled our intent that by 2030 we will be putting in place a pricing system in order to price agricultural emissions. I will note that those future aspects in terms of what we do are not part of the scope of the bill, but I am providing that context in the aspects in terms of what will happen once this process is complete and the repeal is complete. In regards to the overall considerations in regards to emissions in the agricultural sector, it currently reflects around 53% of New Zealand's total emissions. New Zealand has one of the highest proportions of methane from livestock emissions of any country in the world. But our farmers and the primary sector are very focused in terms of the actions required in order to reduce those emissions, and are taking significant steps and investment, particularly through Agri-Zero, in order to achieve those outcomes. I look forward to questions that will follow.
Honourable Joe Luxton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister for his explanation on this piece of legislation. Minister, the Minister has mentioned that it's about removing the backstop whereby the agricultural sector will be moved into the ETS. We understand that, and we understand that there is ongoing work, which I will raise questions about a little bit later on. When we get out amongst our farmers in the agricultural sector, the majority of them will say, we just want certainty. We want to know where we are heading. Certainty is really important for us, and not this toing and froing necessarily when we have changes of governments. My question to the Minister here, Mr Patterson, you might like to listen and perhaps you could take a call. My question to the Minister here is, given that our farmers want certainty, given that there is no plan at all, aside from investing money into technologies, research and development, which is great, which is wonderful, and I will ask questions about that in a little while, how can just simply removing the agriculture from the ETS with no other plan in place and just simply saying we will look to price emissions no later than 2030, how on earth does that give farmers certainty about what's next? The Minister mentioned that farmers are very efficient. We know that. We acknowledge that absolutely we do, and they are doing a lot of work to reduce their emissions. But they ask for certainty. And so I genuinely, and I'm not being political about this either, I genuinely want to know how this provides farmers with any certainty or any plan that they can look toward going forward before 2030.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the member for her contribution. As I noted in my opening comments, the scope of this bill is really answering one simple question. Should agriculture enter the emissions trading scheme on the 1st of January of next year or not? It is a view on this side of the House that it should not. Interestingly, it was the intention of the previous government to eventually remove agriculture from the ETS and establish pricing through He Waka Eke Noa. That program was dead on arrival as we came in as government when we took office a year ago. There was no pathway forward in regards to that work. And so we all agree that pricing for agriculture is not suitable within the ETS. There is no point dangling around the fact that the sector accepts that, and the ETS is not the right tool to do that job. So the point of this bill is to make an agreement to remove it from the ETS, and that is the scope of the bill, and that's what I'm happy to answer questions on.
Honourable Joe Luxton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the Minister for his response. However, in the Minister's opening statement, he did raise a number of other subjects and issues with regard to this piece of legislation, as well as the specific point to this legislation. So I do wonder then that might open up the opportunity to further speak to some of the issues that the Minister did raise. And yes, the Minister is right. This was the backstop should He Waka Eke Noa not go forward. We realise it has not gone forward, but at least it was something. There was a plan in place. There is no plan in place. There is research, there is money being put into research and development, I get that, to reduce methane emissions. The Minister has said
Take a call, Mr Hogarth. The Minister has said that they will look to price emissions no later than 2030. They're simply crossing their fingers and hoping that there will be enough research and development that has gone into place with regards to methane reduction without an actual concrete plan. So if this doesn't come to fruition, how on earth are farmers going to have the certainty? How on earth is this country going to potentially pay for a $24 billion bill if we do not meet our requirements?
Madam Chair. Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Following on from my colleagues' comments and this discussion about the backstop, I don't think anybody here disagrees that the ETS was a backstop, and we note what the Minister was saying, that there was a lot of work to go into Aotearoa that then isn't being continued. But the point is that everybody knows that this is a difficult subject and that a lot of work is required, but there was this backstop date of 2025 to incentivise that discussion. Now, we've had a change of government and changes of priorities, but we're hearing from the Minister that he still anticipates a pricing scheme by 2030. So this then go back to the backstop point. Why then remove the ETS backstop at 2025 and not move that to 2030 if the Minister is so intent on doing some sort of pricing of methane by 2030? That's my first question. My second question is for really the Minister to confirm what I think I just heard him say in his opening address, which was that over 50% of New Zealand's emissions are agricultural. And I ask this because during our second reading debate earlier this week, government support members, at least, seemed to be questioning that. And I said in my second reading speech that I thought that this was an agreeable thing to say, that in New Zealand, you know, at least half of our emissions are coming from agriculture. I didn't think it was controversial, but at the time there was a lot of noise in the House. So I'd like the Minister to confirm that as well. And my third question in this contribution, again relating to what the Minister said in his opening remarks, is about what evidence he's relying on for this statement that we hear often, that New Zealand, I think the Minister said that New Zealand is one of the most efficient countries in the world in terms of greenhouse gas emissions when producing primary produce. I've added in some words there, but I think that's what the Minister was referring to. And we also hear in this House a lot that New Zealand is the most efficient. So I'm interested in what the Minister is basing his statement on, if his words were carefully selected for being one of the most as opposed to the number one most efficient. If he could comment on that, it would be useful, because why it's relevant to this discussion is that the backstop has been removed. So we're now waiting, we're pushing everything out to 2030, and that's just government policy. There's no backstop being provided anymore. And the rationale for removing that backstop is, well, we're already the best, or among the best in the world already. So that is the justification for not having a backstop. So the evidence that's been relied on that statement is very important.
Steve Abel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the Minister regarding this legislation. Further to my colleagues' comments about the removal of the backstop, and I appreciate the Minister acknowledging the substantial problem that emissions are from livestock in our country, a major challenge. Not only is the removal of the backstop a problem for there being no incentive whatsoever for the industry to actually reduce its emissions, but also is the removal of even the reporting requirements. How is it, as the Minister acknowledges that greenhouse gas emissions from livestock and agriculture are such a substantive part of our emissions profile, how is it that we are to even understand what the scale of the problem is if reporting requirements are removed as well? And how is it that we are to understand when gains are made, where those gains are being made? I have an amendment proposed to deal with this, Madam Chair, that I invite the Minister to support. It simply amends Part 1, replacing Part 1, page 3, line 7 to page 6, line 23, with an amendment that retains the reporting requirement for farmers to report on their emissions. It extends the time frame to implement an emissions measurement scheme by 6 months, meaning this would be required from the 1st of July 2025. This will enable a better understanding of the emissions profile of the agricultural sector and will prepare farmers for the claimed certainty that there will be emissions pricing and for reducing their emissions. This amendment retains the bulk of the legislative regime to enable pricing agricultural emissions at a later date. I have a second amendment, Madam Chair, that I invite the Minister to support also, because this legislation also removes the requirement of agricultural processors to report. That is another extraordinary step, because those processors have been reporting their emissions since 2011, Madam Chair. One of the most vital things we need in understanding any environmental problem is solid data on the pollution, on the emissions, on what is the nature of the problem. And if you take away the requirement for processors or farmers to report, you basically you remove the ability of us to understand the scale of the problem, and likewise the ability to understand the scale of success when we do manage to reduce emissions. So the second amendment that I have proposed to Part 1, replacing Part 1, page 3, line 7 to page 6, line 23, retains reporting requirement for agricultural processors to report on their emissions as they have done since 2011. This will enable a better understanding of the emissions profile of the agricultural sector and of the processors. It also retains the bulk of the legislative framework, including references and definitions related to agricultural activity, to enable emissions pricing for agriculture at a later date. Surely the Minister, and this is a question I put to you, Minister, wishes to retain the ability of us to understand the scale of the emissions problem. I'd love to hear your response to that. Thank you.
Madam
Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for members for those questions. I want to reinforce the aspects that I noted in my opening statement, that it is the government's position that pricing of agriculture is not suitable within the emissions trading scheme, and hence the purpose of this legislation is to remove agriculture from the emissions trading scheme. There is a consensus position in regards to industry feedback around that. It was the position of the prior intent of the prior government to remove agriculture from the ETS. This bill is simply doing that. It is not doing anything else in regards to that primary purpose. In regards to the points made by the member in regards to amendment papers on visibility and reporting, this bill does not affect the ability to account for ag emissions. The processor level reporting obligations that the bill removes are entirely separate from the national accounting of agricultural emissions. The New Zealand accounting standards around national emissions uses data sets from a wide range of sources, including Statistics New Zealand and other aspects, Lamb and Beef New Zealand, Dairy New Zealand, etc. It does not use ETS data which was last updated in 2012. So I will not be accepting or supporting those amendments because they are not going to be serving any purpose. The purpose here is to stop pricing of agriculture in 55 days from today. That is the reality. And it is a position that, as I said, is one of consensus support, and I am surprised by those that aren't supportive.
Honourable Damien O'Connor, and apologies, my peripheral vision didn't go back to your previous seat.
I'm often invisible around here, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have a few key questions for the Minister. The bill here, right in the second line, says amends the Climate Change Response Act to remove agricultural activities from the New Zealand's emissions trading scheme. So I asked the Minister, did he consider removing the energy component of agricultural activities? That is, in processing, there's a huge amount of coal. In agriculture, there's a lot of diesel. Did the Minister or did the government consider moving that? Because if it is hell-bent on removing agriculture from the ETS, it's only part of it. So the bill is actually quite misleading. It doesn't take agricultural activities at all out of the ETS. It takes or removes what was a backstop obligation for biogenic methane and nitrous oxide. So the question of whether the Minister, and he can answer it, how is nitrous oxide going to be considered given it plays a part in different stages of the agricultural system? The second one was, did the Minister consider taking the transport component of agriculture, tractors, a lot of trucks, those travelling around the country will see 53-tonne trucks carting milk backwards and forwards. Did the Minister consider taking that out? Because if the bill says it's to take agricultural activities from the emissions trading scheme, it's quite misleading. So perhaps the Minister can say how he considered that. The other things that I'd like the Minister to answer is that it takes away, or he says it leaves the ability to calculate your emissions, but of course it takes away the obligation. So it's kind of a market approach to it. So where does that leave Fonterra and its proposal to know your number? And should farmers choose not to do that, how will that be followed through? Because so the Minister has probably considered this, maybe hasn't. So maybe he can answer that question. I'll leave it to the Minister.
Madam Chair.
Mark Cameron.
Yes, thank you very much, Minister, for joining us this afternoon. Quick questions, and I know my colleague will as well. Minister, could you enlighten the House in your understanding of the primary industries that the animal ruminant sector has been falling since about 2010, so the overall contribution of methane by virtue of that is diminishing, withstanding we are talking about a short-lived gas that decays back to CO2 in terms of the overall contribution of the primary sector. What do you think would have been the counterfactual, Minister, should farmers have been forced into what would otherwise Hawake Kanoa, and that's obviously been now disbanded? And do you want to speak to, kind sir, the 20% of wool growers that were potentially going to go out of business should that have been adopted? So going forward, is it your perception that we put pragmatism back in the room to help rural New Zealand adopt the kind of practices and also allow them to adopt technology to nullify this problem?
Honourable Mark Patterson.
I heard the threat to the wool industry there, so I thought I'd better get up and seek some clarity from the Minister. Look, just in follow-up to some of the questions my colleague Mark Cameron just said, there does seem to be some confusion here. I'd like you to illuminate that the problem, as I understand it, what we're trying to do here is just take the backstop mechanism out that was a CO2 equivalent, which is something that was wholly dismissed. It's a world-leading approach to have a split gas approach. This mechanism here is CO2 equivalents, which I think everyone, and I think you did allude to that earlier, across the industry and actually across the political Spectrum has decided that that is a wholly inappropriate measure for which to deal with the challenge of biogenic methane. And you may not be in a position to fully confirm this yet, but for those that are watching or listening today that may be alarmed at the impact of agricultural emissions on the climate, is the Minister in a position to maybe allay some of those fears by outlining some of the figures that he's seeing in terms of this? As I understand it, we are in a position potentially with New Zealand agriculture that we are well on track to meet obligations that we have made in this House and internationally. So we are actually catastrophising about a problem that actually isn't existing in real time. Thank you.
Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the Minister for his answers. Can I ask him a number of questions? Can I first get the Minister to agree that the large amount of risk for the rural industries in respect of methane disappeared the moment the last government, with New Zealand First at the time actually, introduced a split gas target so that the amount of emission reduction expected from short-lived gases like biogenic methane was a lot lower than the reduction in emissions required from carbon dioxide, because from my perspective that was the first big limitation of risk for the rural sector, which was appropriate. Secondly, that in respect of that split gas target, there is still a desire to reduce emissions from methane, and that therefore I can't understand the logic as to why the rest of the economy should face a price-based measure to reward emission reductions when the agricultural sector doesn't. I don't understand the economics of that, because it seems to me the economic theory that applies to CO2 also applies to nitrous oxide or methane in respect to those issues. The next point I would ask the Minister to comment upon is the report back from on the bill. The government, the general policy statement says that processors may pass the same cost to all farmers regardless of their emissions efficiency, and so the concern that seemed to be expressed in this explanatory note was that there wouldn't be a reward for the farmer that goes further. And I agree that that is a valid concern, but I asked the Minister whether he considered one of the options on the table, which was to effectively run a scheme where the farmers who were ahead of the curve got rewarded by emission reductions that were taken out of the general pool, which would have remedied that particular problem and left an effective price signal rather than a cross-subsidy from the rest of the economy. And then volunteers effectively would have been rewarded, and that would have been taken out of the pool in a way that would have encouraged the requisite behaviour. Can I also ask the Minister to confirm that the backstop included 95% free allocation of emissions based on 1990 emissions, so there was no great financial risk to those sectors that I've heard some other members in this House say the rural industry was exposed to, because there was 95% free allocation. And then, so there was only exposure for risk for the last 5% of emissions. And can I lastly ask the Minister whether consideration was given to the suggestion by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, the Right Honourable Simon Upton, who suggested that the way through here was to have a separate pricing scheme for methane with offsets from carbon dioxide sequestration and pine forests being reserved for the rural sector, rather than to being used by, for example, the energy sector or the industrial sector to offset their emissions, because from his point of view there is a fallacy in taking a 30-year offset in respect of a CO2 emission that lasts 1,000 years, whereas there is good sense in enabling farmers to have the benefit of a forestry offset to offset methane emissions if they couldn't reduce them otherwise.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll work my way through questions from members. I'll start by firstly again reinforcing, as I noted in my opening statement, that the government and this government has repeatedly stated that it has commitments in regards to pricing of agriculture. The task now is to get that in place by 2030 and to put the ETS aspect to bed. It is acknowledged by all that the ETS is not the suitable structure in which agricultural emissions pricing should fall part of. The simple purpose of this very narrow bill is to ensure that that is not undertaken, and that is the scope in which we are covering. The point in regards to the split gas approach in terms of a principle is one that is noted. We are committed in regards to a fair and sustainable pricing, but outside of the ETS. It would be simply inefficient of any government to look to put agricultural into the ETS and then to take it out. That is ridiculous. I'm not sure why members on the opposition would think that that would be a sensible thing to do. Well, I probably do know, but I'm not going to get into that. But the reality is that is what we're doing here in regards to that. In regards to some of the comments in regards to emissions, well, let's be clear. Diesel going into a ute, petrol going into a farm bike is covered under the ETS and will continue to be so. So that aspect in regards to on-farm considerations is not changing at all, because we know when you get fuel from a service station, that is covered under the ETS. The point around nitrous oxide, about 70% of that comes from livestock particularly, and that is a key driver in terms of that. Fonterra, the question around that, they supported this legislation at Select Committee. They support farm level systems. And in regards to the methane science point and the target review, we have work underway around that. We'll look to update that view of the science in due course. Methane targets can only be met by gross reductions in methane, and the ERP2 process that we have underway will take into account those considerations.
Francisco Hernandez.
Here, and thank you for answering our questions, Minister. I just wanted to interrogate a little bit of the answers that you gave earlier. You said one of the sort of policy rationales for, I guess, removing agriculture from the, processor level, at a processor level from the emissions trading scheme is that there's an intent to have on-farm emissions pricing by 2030. I think it's worth looking at the context around this. I mean, we've been trying to price agricultural emissions since, I think, the early 2000s, and you're absolutely correct that nobody in this House sees putting agriculture at a processor level in the emissions trading scheme as the most optimal solution. That's why it's called a backstop. It's sort of a means of last resort. So I guess my question is, if there's no on-farm emissions pricing by 2030, then what is the backstop? What is the kind of, if it's not done by then, what will we actually do to price emissions in the agricultural sector? Because the regulatory impact statement made some particularly good points around the issue of the intersectoral equity, and that there's 600,000 enterprises in New Zealand roughly, and they all face, other than the agricultural-based ones, they all face some sort of price for their polluting activity in regards to our climate targets, at least, their greenhouse gas emissions. And that's why in the intersectoral analysis of the cost-benefit analysis section, the multi-criteria analysis rather, the minister's preferred option was ranked with 2 minus points, because they've correctly identified that this does actually create some intersectoral inequity in the sense that and the logic here is that agriculture is the New Zealand agriculture industry is the most efficient in the world. It's often repeated, and in some measurements and in some studies that's shown to be true. But why wouldn't that logic apply for other enterprises in the non-farming world? For example, video gaming is, the video game industry is, I would assume, quite efficient in terms of, producing economic activity relative to the amount of carbon it uses, because New Zealand, the New Zealand energy system is mostly renewable. So if the kind of logic for exempting agriculture for paying for emissions is because it's efficient, should we not apply that logic wider to the rest of the economy? And that is correctly what the intrasectoral analysis is revealing here, because it's actually not very fair. And the other repeated claim is that it's a short-lived gas. I mean, absolutely, it is a short-lived gas. There is a biochemical difference, but there's also another sector that is a short-lived gas, methane, which is in the emissions trading scheme, and that's the waste sector. Now, the waste sector still has to reduce their methane. It's still in the emissions trading scheme. Yeah. So if the logic of, because it's a methane, because it's a short-lived gas, well, most of the emissions from waste is also a short-lived gas. So would we, on that basis, also seek to exclude waste from the emissions trading scheme? So, and I heard the members here, I can't remember whether it's on the left or the right, directionally challenged today, say biogenic methane. And yes, absolutely. We do need to take the challenge of biogenic methane head on, which is why, I guess, to be consistent with, I guess, the philosophy of the parties on the right, well, on the left here, which is, well, on the right philosophically and on the left, I guess, geographically to me. Pricing is a powerful mechanism. So why move away from this market kind of driven approach, which is to actually price things, and why move to, I guess, a sort of vague system where there's no kind of guarantee that emissions will actually reduce? Because we have been working at the challenge of reducing biogenic methane emissions for agriculture for at least 20 years now, and we've not no closer.
I'm going to take a call from Honourable Damien O'Connor. I just want to say that we've been waiting for some amendment papers to be sorted and a new sheet to come through. Well, the questions have been relevant to this point about having agriculture in the ETS or not. That is important. What I would like now is to narrow people down to the clauses in the bill and specific questions to the Minister around the clauses or the amendment papers that people have put up. Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Clause 33 is the operative provision that removes agricultural activities. I'm asking the question again of the Minister around consideration that he or officials may have made as to the impact of this legislation. So the question of whether nitrous oxide or diesel or that should be taken out of agricultural activities, given that's what is said in the bill, he clarified before. There are two other areas. Trees grown on farms are part of normal agricultural management systems for shelter, for shade, and so there has been an attempt, and maybe the Minister can clarify whether he is proposing to take trees planted on agriculture land out of the ETS, because farmers asked for, and in fact under our provisions included them in. So the farmers wanted trees grown on farms in the ETS, but not other agricultural activities. So it's a bit of, have your cake and eat it too. So one of the proposals, so that's a question for the Minister, is he going to take trees out of the ETS that are grown on agricultural land? The second one is processors. Now, what this does is take away the potential obligation for processors to report their emissions or surrender their emissions. So one of the options was, of course, that the levy from agricultural, from biogenic methane, based on a calculations for efficiencies of farming systems, one that would have, and currently does for some processing companies, acknowledge good practice. So that is that farmers that supply animals to the processors from good farm systems that have emitted less methane get a reward acknowledged, usually in a bonus payment, from those processors, maybe Fonterra, maybe for the meat companies. So there's already processor obligations to report their emissions through the ETS. So if you were to roll that forward, as was a proposal, and thereby achieve the inclusion of biogenic methane in an emissions trading scheme, which was acknowledged internationally in my travels, acknowledged consistently as being leading edge, being at the forefront of the pack. And farmers said, why should we be at the forefront? So the question to the Minister, was there an assessment done of the potential lost opportunity for New Zealand food and fibre produce being at the forefront of global emissions reduction and thereby receiving bonus payments? Because the reality is some of our customers, that is some of the big players, Nestle in particular, are prepared to pay bonuses for lower carbon ingredients. So the lost opportunity from this piece of legislation, in my view and in my experience, is huge. Was this calculated when the Minister and his government proposed to just take it out? Because while we acknowledge including biogenic methane and on-farm emissions was not ideal in the ETS, and we proposed He Waka Eke Noa, that was rejected, so the backstop is what we're adjusting here. My question is, if you go back to processor level obligations and you have a calculation that acknowledges emissions from farm, and it's 95% discount, remember? It's not full payment. This is bringing all agricultural emissions, including biogenic methane, into a payment system, acknowledged internationally time and time again when I was in the marketplace and talking to trade partners, acknowledged as being at the forefront of our efforts to reduce international agricultural emissions. There is still a determination to do that. If New Zealand had been at the forefront of that, the opportunity for bonus payments, for premiums, was huge, was and still is huge. The Minister and his government, by bringing in this legislation and removing what could have been a simple proposal through processor level obligations to put us at the forefront of that, my question is, how much is it costing us?
Honourable Simon
Madam
Watts.
Chair, thank you for those questions. In regards to the points raised by the Honourable Damien O'Connor in regards to any policy positions around removing forestry that is already from within the ETS, the categoric answer to that is no. We have no intention of doing that. What we did inherit from prior administrations was significant volatility and lack of certainty in the ETS because of positions around what was in or out of the ETS in regards to forestry. We have worked very hard to restore credibility in the ETS, and one of the key aspects is in regards to the role of removals, of which we see as a fundamental part of a net-based strategy. In regards to the point from Member Hernandez in regards to the options being considered, if I refer, and if you refer to the RIS, I'm sure you've read it, but maybe if you do, then there are three options that were considered as part of this work. A full repeal, which we are talking about and discussing as part of this bill, delayed backstop and retained reporting. The full repeal scenario, of which this bill is executing, delivers upon the government's commitments in regards to keeping agriculture out of the ETS. So the assessment of options was undertaken, a decision was made, and that is what we are referring through today. I also want to regard as where we stand today, and as is outlined in the draft emissions reduction plan that we published in May. That plan signalled and indicated that we are broadly on track to meet the 2030 methane reduction targets today, where we stand. No pricing, no other aspects, we are on track where we are today in terms of meeting that target. And the conversation in regards to the need to bring in place this right now when farmers do not have all the tools in which they can utilise in order to deploy, to take action to do that, is unreasonable and not practical, and will bring potentially 100,000 farmers into the ETS on the 1st of January, which will have significant costs on that sector, significant compliance complications, significant bureaucracy. And I will reiterate, on this side of the House, that is not the way in which we do business. And I can tell you what, from conversations with the farming community, that is not the way in which they do business either. We are working with the sector, not against them. We all understand the obligations we need to do around emissions reduction. The agricultural sector are doing a lot in this regard already, and there is more to be done, but what we are discussing here is removing pricing of agriculture from the ETS starting in 55 days' time. And we are very clear across the board, actually, that agriculture pricing should not be part of the ETS. So I think we get back to basics and do what the bill says and get on with the process of repealing it out of the ETS.
Steve Abel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak again. Minister, further to the points you've just made, acknowledging that emissions have reduced somewhat, how have you accounted for the cause of that? Surely having in place an inevitable pricing that's going to come into effect and having in place a backstop are explicitly incentives for the agricultural sector to deal with its emissions. Is it not correct to assert that it's because of the very certainty that an emissions pricing scheme is going to come into effect that the sector is investing in finding ways to reduce emissions, looking at means of reducing its emissions, that farmers are taking actions to do it? And furthermore, when the Aotearoa process was undertaken, there were strong arguments made by the agricultural sector that the water regulations that were being put in place would have a similar effect to any specific climate emissions regulations. What assessments have you made, Minister, on the impact of your governments in relation to climate emissions? Because these things were linked by the sector. I remember very distinctly being told by federated farmers, oh, the water reg is going to have an effect on climate emissions, so you don't need to specifically take action on climate emissions. What analysis have you done on the impact of removal also by this government of water regulations on opening the door to increased emissions in the future? Because where are the disincentives for the sector to now increase its emissions, to now expand its activities in a way that takes no account of greenhouse gas emissions? And speaking to the specifics of the potency of the gases we're talking about, Minister, I want to pick up on the comment of the short-lived nature of methane that my colleague acknowledged. What about the long-lived nature of nitrous oxide, which is a 300 times more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide and is a long-lived gas? And you rightly acknowledge that it is largely attributable to the urine and the methane and the dung, the manure from animals, but that is driven by the agricultural intensity that is facilitated by a lack of processor pricing on the things like fertiliser, which of course is the other contributor to nitrous oxide. So what consideration was given to the impact on what you have claimed are the successes that are coming in the sector, on those successes continuing? Because it seems obvious, it seems axiomatic that if you remove any of the incentives, any promise of a forthcoming pricing regime, any sort of backstop, that those emissions are going to start increasing again. There's a clause, an amendment specifically, Madam Chair, that I have proposed regarding ensuring that at the farm level and at the processor level, that there's a requirement that retains farmers to surrender emissions credits up until the 1st of January 2030, extends the timeframe to implement fair on-farm emissions pricing scheme to the 1st of January 2030 and retains agricultural processor obligations. Retaining emissions pricing for agricultural processors will enable the 2030 methane emissions target to be met. This is the assumption of this amendment, which is an amendment to Clause 4, replacing Clause 4, page 3, lines 12 to 19, with Section 2A amended. This is the sort of amendment that takes into account what you are apparently trying to achieve, but doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'd appreciate a response to those questions, Minister. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Honourable Andrew Hogarth.
Madam Chair, just two quick questions for the Minister. As has been mentioned about, talk of how, we get 95% free allocation, can the Minister confirm whether or not reports by the previous government showed that the He Waka Eke Noa scheme would have cost 20% of sheep and beef production in this country, and that actually the ETS backstop was even worse? So, well, profitability and quantity. Profitability is quite important, I do like to make a profit. Obviously, you're not too interested in farmers making money. The other question is, what, if anything, in this bill will stop companies listening to the market? 100%. They're taking on board market signals, transferring them to farmers, and in terms of what's happening right now on farm, I record all the emissions that are happening on farm. I have an insights report by Fonterra that gives me ideas on how to improve my efficiency on farm and improve the greenhouse gas emissions from my farm. I do not see anything in this bill that will stop that from carrying on. Can the Minister please confirm that that is the case?
Honourable Simon Watts.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. As I said in my opening statement, He Waka Eke Noa was dead on arrival when we came in from this government. It had no ability in order to do anything. The consensus was lost, and hence we did not proceed with that. In regards to the other aspects that has been noted by the member in terms of the broader work that's underway, it is clear from our perspective that this bill, again, is a very simple bill. The mechanisms in which this will achieve in terms of reporting for agricultural emissions are already in place and available out there across the market. And it is important to take a market-led approach. And as I've stated, as outlined in our draft emissions reduction plan, the market is already, in conjunction with the industry, on track to meet targets in regards to emissions reduction by 2030.
Honourable Joe Luxton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given that the Minister has just raised the point around being on target to reach our reductions, I just wanted to come back. There's a couple of things in that I wanted to ask the Minister about, but I also want to come back to the point that my colleague, the Honourable Rachel Brooking, brought up with regard to extending the backstop rather than getting rid of it, extending it, which the Minister didn't seem to answer at the time. And I think that's a really, it's a genuine question that should be responded to, because as the Minister himself or others perhaps has mentioned, that it has driven really good behaviour and the type of behaviours that we want to see from our agricultural sector. If he was to consider extending it out further while the current technologies that the government is investing in and talking about come to fruition, and then they can price by 2030, what harm is there in extending this backstop plan out to just beyond 2030 or 2030 for that matter, simply because of the fact the Minister has raised that currently we're on track to meet our reductions. But again, what happens if this all falls apart, that we don't bring to fruition the technologies that they're heavily investing in, and it puts us at risk of not meeting our methane reduction targets. So therefore, why is it not then okay or worth thinking about moving the backstop of bringing agriculture into ETS to further beyond or to 2030?
Mr. Chair. The Honourable Rachel Brooken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do note that my colleague, who also resides in the fine city of Dunedin, has more questions to ask as well. Now, I just want to really comment. Now, my colleagues just re-asked a question that I asked, so I won't go over that. But I would like to ask the Minister to respond to a couple of comments that have been made by his coalition partners and both members of the executive. So the first one, and then I have a third question about the ETS in general. So the first comment was from the Honourable Mark Patterson, who seemed to be suggesting that because some emissions reductions have happened, that everything is on track and there is nothing more to do. And I would like him to comment on that in the context of what I see on the Climate Commission's website, that there are significant risks to meeting the second and third emissions budgets and the 2030 biogenic methane target. The agriculture and transport sectors show the largest risks, and insufficient action to reduce emissions in these sectors will put the second and third emissions budgets at risks. And they go on. So there's, I know the Minister knows this well, there's very clear advice from the Climate Commission about risks to those second and third budgets. So not looking at the first, can he respond to Honourable Mark Patterson's comments and how they relate to the second and third emissions budgets? That's my first question. My second one is in relation to Minister Hogarth's comments just now about can the market-led approach still happen if there's not this backstop of the ETS? And of course, the market is always there. But what I'm interested in, if you take the logic of that argument, it is that nothing would ever be in the ETS, and I wonder what the Minister's feelings are about the total abandonment of the polluter pays principle, because that is where all these conversations are about climate emissions. They are pollution, and we have a polluter pays principle. So where does he stand on that, particularly in regard to his colleague from his coalition partner raising that issue? And then my third new question is if the Minister can give any explanation about why most of his government's climate change documents and policy documents say that everything is coming back to the ETS. So we saw in the budget the $3 billion of reductions in policies and complementary policies for cutting climate emissions, and this heavy reliance on the ETS. So why then is the backstop removed for agriculture, and why does it go further than methane emissions? We've heard contributions from the Green Party, so I won't go further into that, and from Honourable David Parker and Honourable Damien O'Connor have all touched on that aspect of that there are actually a whole lot of different elements that are being removed from the ETS backstop here. It is not simply the methane that cows burp. I think that is what most people think about when they're thinking about agricultural emissions. Of course, other ruminants do as well. But this is also into fertiliser and nitrous oxide as well. So if the Minister could explain those three questions, that would be useful. And again, if he can go back to my original questions, which was, is he confirming that he agrees with in its government policy that at least 50% of New Zealand's emissions are from agriculture, because some of his colleagues in his own party seemed to dispute that the other night. And what is he doing for that to get this 2030 pricing scheme in place? And what is his evidence that New Zealand is the most or one of the most efficient primary producers in the world? Thank you.
Francisco Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go on now to the actual legislation because I have a couple of questions around Part 1, Section 5, about the repeal of some of the Treaty of Waitangi clauses in the kind of legislation. And, I am asking genuine questions here because if my colleague Lawrence Renan was here, he would look at this legislation and understand what it meant straight away. So I'm asking genuine good faith questions about how to interpret this legislation. And I'm asking because, the Greens are a political party with Te Tiriti at the heart of our constitution. And I'm also asking because in my electorate of Dunedin, which I am List MP based in Dunedin, I actually received a higher share of the party vote from Te Pāti Māori voters than I did Green voters. So I feel some obligation towards our colleagues here in Te Pāti Māori to try and ask questions about Te Tiriti. So my question is Section 3AB. Why is that 3B1A? Why is that section repealed? And that section is around.
Can I invite members if they want to have a conversation? Those two doors, have it in the hallway. Francisco Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the parent legislation is 3AB1, and it refers to, with respect to the following provisions, with respect to relate to powers of secondary legislation, before recommending the making of secondary legislation. Under those provisions, the Minister must consult or be satisfied that the Chief Executive has consulted representatives of iwi and Māori that appear to the Minister Chief Executive have an interest in the secondary legislation. Now, I understand and appreciate that huge chunks of that kind of secondary legislation of this is kind of being wiped out anyway, so that could be the reason for it. But some of these clauses are pretty benign. For example, X1, the Governor General may, by order, it's just talking about how to calculate the methodology for methane and nitrous oxide methane reductions from agricultural activity. I mean, surely even if you're not intending to price agricultural emissions through the emissions trading scheme at the processor level, and I concede that's a policy choice that the government is making, surely it would be good to have, to still have the input of tangata whenua in that when you're making legislation and when you're making regulation, because, not only do Māori have huge interest in the agribusiness sector. I think one of the speeches from the colleagues in Te Pāti Māori actually pointed out that, Māori were the original farmers of this country, and they've still got a huge stake in what's happening here. So, I guess my question is, why are these kind of provisions being scrapped? What do they do? And I want to refer back to the answers that the Minister responded, and thank you graciously for your answers, Minister. You mentioned the cost-benefit analysis in the regulatory impact statement, and I noticed that the status quo had a cost-benefit analysis done, and it was shown to be positive, but I also noticed that none of the alternatives had cost-benefit analysis done to them. So my question to the Minister around that is that, has there actually been a cost-benefit analysis done on the alternative proposals? Have I just misread the paper? Are they somewhere else? And if so, do they show a similar positive CBA compared to the status quo? Because I think that's important to the legislation, to what we're proposing. And the second is that the Minister alluded to the fact that we were already on track according to the projections of the second emissions reduction plan. Now, I checked back to that document, and it said that that was with the assumption that a methane inhibitor was developed. And I'm sure the Minister is already aware that although the development of technology is necessary, it's only one component of the adoption of public policy. And I guess the previous emissions reduction plan made a reference to methane inhibitors as well, but they viewed that as complementary to a pricing scheme, because if there's a pricing scheme, you actually incentivize the uptake of these technological measures. So can you please confirm my understanding? Thank you.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, thank you for the member for those questions. To be clear, this bill does not repeal the requirement for government to engage on secondary legislation, including with iwi Māori. It only repeals the sections requiring consultation about secondary legislation related to agricultural New Zealand ETS obligations, as these provisions will no longer be required as agricultural activities will be removed from the bill. So that aspect that you've noted is clarified in that regard. I also want to, there's been a number of questions throughout in regards to nitrous oxide. It is a common misconception that nitrous oxide is a significant contributor to ag emissions. Fertiliser accounts for around 18% of ag emissions, nitrous oxide, and the total contribution from fertiliser is around 3.8%. Nitrous oxide is around 9% of total emissions, and it is sensible to think that if the majority of nitrous oxide, as was noted by a prior member and many farmers here will be aware, comes from urine and dung from animals, then it would be sensible for it to be considered alongside methane versus being treated within the components that we've discussed already. So I think that is a little bit of background in regards to a number of questions in that space.
Before I take the next contributions, it would be helpful for the House if people could refer to the specific clauses that they're referring to, that they're debating on, that they're providing contributions on. So I'll take that as call.
Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Priyanka Radhakrishnan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will, as you've mentioned, relate my specific questions to clauses in the bill. I think from memory, clause 33 removes agriculture from the ETS, and I just wanted to traverse, I guess, some of the questions that I don't think the Minister has really clarified. He did clarify why this government had made the decision ultimately to remove the ETS, agriculture from the ETS, and that is laid out, of course, in the RIS as well quite clearly. It's talked about the increasing number of participants. The Minister mentioned a number that was 100,000, and I did hear colleagues on this side of the House query that number. I don't see an explanation within the RIS, as far as I can tell, that tells us how that number was arrived at. So I would appreciate some clarification from the Minister around that. To the point that my colleague Rachel Brooking made earlier, and there's been some conversation, some discussion in the House from both sides around whether incentives, market incentives alone will take us to a point that the Minister mentioned, which is meeting our emissions reductions targets, or whether it was in fact this backstop. Everyone agrees that it's not the ideal response, but as has been traversed before, it is a backstop. So if there's nothing better that the sector can look forward to currently, wouldn't the delay, one of the options that's laid out in the RIS, wouldn't delaying the backstop at least give the sector some certainty that something was going to be put in place, as opposed to what's currently laid out in the RIS, which I'll get to in a minute. So I would appreciate, I don't believe the Minister's clarified that point around the incentive. And that was the point of this backstop. And it says in the RIS that the pricing ag emissions through the ETS was set up. There's a whole point around para 10 around that, and part of it was that it provided a clear signal of intention and helped act as an incentive to drive uptake of emissions. We've seen examples, whether it's Dairy NZ or Fonterra, who have been pushing that agenda in terms of more sustainable agriculture as well. But whether that is actually because they know that if they don't do something about it, they will be priced in 2030, or whether it was the market incentives is unclear. What was the Minister's thinking around that in picking the particular option that the government has landed with? The other question that I had was around the technologies and tools that the Minister mentioned as well. Totally get and accept the point that the government wants to ensure that the sector has access to that technology and tools. I note that the Minister has announced previously, I think it was 400 million investment in tech and tools there, and that the government has signalled intention to equip farmers. But what I've been hearing is that that's still quite a way off and does not necessarily mean that pricing or that the tools and technologies will be available in order for pricing to be put in place by 2030. So what, I guess, what guarantees or what assurances can the Minister give? Can he provide some clarity around the thinking there? What are those? What is the time frame for that? My final question that I wanted to ask was just around para 17 of the RIS, which kind of makes mention, and the Minister alluded to this in his opening remarks as well, that there is a plan. I know that my colleagues on the side of the House have pointed to the fact that removing a backstop, which was, you know, a backstop, if there was nothing else in place. Yeah, it was an incentive, it played a role, but also it meant that if the sector couldn't come up with a pricing regime, that this would at least ensure that we reduced our emissions. But taking away that backstop with no plan leaves actually the sector with less certainty. There is a work plan that is alluded to here, it's very high level, and I wondered if the Minister would be able to give us a little bit more around the thinking of that plan and what certainty can the sector have that this plan will actually get us to where we want to be in 2030.
Tom Rutherford.
I move the debate on this question now closed.
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would be great to get answers to the questions just asked, and I'll remind the Minister again, I still am interested in if he agrees with his coalition partners about the rejection of polluter pays and that we're well on track for the second and third emissions budgets. But going back to the Minister's last answer, he was talking about nitrous oxide from fertiliser being 3.8% of emissions, and that in fact most of the nitrous oxide emissions come from animals themselves, and therefore the logic is because the animals are also making the biogenic methane, we'll stick the two together and not separate them out. How does that logic flow from what my colleague, who also lives in Dunedin, not the member for Dunedin, I'd like to say, how does that link with the very good point that he was making about methane applying for waste and how it is treated now differently from the methane related to the animals? Like, the logic doesn't seem to flow that just because something is related to an animal, that one gas is sometimes related to an animal, but sometimes it is not. Sometimes it is related to fertiliser. That seems like a very good reason to treat that nitrous oxide that's coming from the fertiliser differently from the nitrous oxide that is coming from the animals. And the logic that he has applied, he's not applying to other examples of where gases come from different uses. So if you could comment on that, please.
Mr. Chair.
Land Farm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really pleased to be able to speak to this very significant bill with such significant implications for our climate future, and especially, you know, at a time in the world where we've just had this significant election result in the US, and the implications for climate and therefore our own actions alongside the rest of the world in actually raising the bar in how we actually apply our policies and apply our actions in urgently reducing emissions has arguably come into much more focus. So I would really like the Minister to consider the Green Party's proposed amendment. And this, Mr. Chair, is to clause 14 of the bill. So this is page 4, line 19, and it proposes to delete clause 14, lines 19 to 20. Now, The mechanics of it is that it would actually delete the the bill proposes, to delete and agriculture to the cross-heading in the bill allocation of New Zealand units in relation to industry and agriculture. But this amendment seeks to actually retain the reference to and agriculture in that cross-heading. And really this is just about retaining the opportunity to actually put in a legislative framework and enable pricing agricultural emissions at a later date. And I think this is really important because, the government has been so clear in their comments that they are committed to meeting emissions reductions, and we've heard that over and over. And they've got this, pastoral sector working group who's going to be looking at this. I'm really interested to hear as well if this is actually a funded group at this stage, because I think at Scrutiny Week it was unfunded at that stage. I think what we're seeing with climate, not only with the significance of the election that we've just seen, but we are seeing significantly concerning impacts of climate around the world. And it feels like, no matter where we are in the political spectrum, we're going to have this oh dear moment where we realise that actually voluntary mechanisms and taking our time to take action is actually not going to cut it. And we will need to put in not only legislative mechanisms and pricing mechanisms, we're really going to have that whole carrot and the stick approach. So I would really like to hear from the Minister whether he would consider that and consider retaining the option of actually putting in this legislative change in the future.
Mr. Chair.
Chairman, we had a request from a number of questioners of the Minister for why he had rejected the idea of delaying the date of the backstop rather than removing it. I haven't heard that addressed. It's an important point. In respect of the issue as to why the Minister perhaps should have adopted that option, I'm not someone who has ever favoured at this stage farm level reporting of emissions for everybody. It's ironic to me that the industry called for that and then, having got it, said it was too complex, complained about the administrative burden, and therefore advocated against their farm leaders who were proposing that as a solution. I've always thought the better solution is to have a processor level obligation, which is very simple because instead of having thousands of participants in the ETS, you have a dozen or so, major ones, maybe a few others, and then allowing volunteers who are doing better than the average to actually receive the benefit as a volunteer, because there are farm leaders who should be rewarded for doing better than the average, and taking that difference out of the pool. And that way you would have a very administratively efficient way of rewarding those who are progressing faster than the average in their emissions reduction without the burden of farm level emission reductions for everyone. And I hope that the Minister, when he is considering alternatives to this, will keep that in mind, because I see no benefit to putting the regulatory burden on all farmers to no great ends. If farmers are just going to meet the average, let them meet the average through the processor. Let those that are leading and doing better be rewarded for that, and they will lead and create opportunities for others to follow for the benefit of the farming sector, of our economy and for the environment, but without the administrative burden of everyone being in at the farm level. So, Mr. Chairman, I would invite the Minister to respond to that, because it is related to the issue as to why perhaps it would be better just to extend the backstop date so that that could be worked through. I have never been convinced of the farm level obligation. The ETS, as originally designed, and I did it way back when in about 2007, was designed to be at the processor level, always had the protection of 90% free allocation, taken further to 95% free allocation, and I still think that that is the practical way through it. That could have been enabled now by an extension to the date.
point of order, Francisco Hernandez.
Mr. Chair, I'm taking this point of order to seek guidance from you on whether, on which part we're to discuss Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 of the bill in. I would just like some clarification.
Some clarification. Let's take some advice on that. Yeah, that's in this debate.
So part 1?
Yes.
Thank you.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll work my way through some of those questions. Honourable Rachel Brookings' point in regards to agricultural emissions, 53% source for that is part of the 2022 New Zealand greenhouse gas inventory, which can be found on MFE's website. In regards to the question around where did the 100,000 farmers come from, I had a chat with the Minister of Revenue, and there is 50,000 GST registered farmers, and in addition to that there's 56,000 others, including small block holders, so 100,000, 106 were in that ballpark. In regards to the questions raised by the Honourable David Parker, the points in regards to the future models that government may be considering in regards to policy of the pricing mechanisms of which we have committed to by 2030 are not part of the scope of this bill, but we will be taking into account all considerations as part of that process.
Francisco Hernandez. Francisco Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought you'd called me Steve Abel, but that's not a confusion that's happened quite yet. No, he's a better looking man than me, so compliment.
So humble.
Thank you for allowing me to take this call, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your guidance earlier. As you'll see, there's still quite a lot of ground to cover in both Schedule 1 and Schedule 2, so I hope you'll resist efforts by the government benches to prematurely close this debate. I'll turn now to the question to the Minister, which is around Part 1, Clause 8, around the repeal of some functions of the Climate Change Commission. So that's Clause 8, and it repeals Section 5J of the Climate Change Commission's function, specifically Section 5JHA. And I think it's always concerning, and I appreciate that I've already anticipated that the minister's answers that because it repeals the secondary legislation, that it's fair enough to repeal one aspect of the legislation that established the Climate Change Commission. But I think we need to be very careful about unilaterally and imposing the changes on the powers of the Climate Change Commission without a cross-party consensus, because it's one of the watchdog agencies that this Crown does have. It's one of the kind of independent monitoring functions that the Crown has set up to make sure that it's independently accountable. And particularly in regard to climate change, that's really important because, the government of the day essentially controls the greenhouse gas inventory process. I've been a participant in that process. I was one of the expert reviewers in the waste sector for the, I think, 2022 or 2021 inventory. It was feels like a long time ago now, but it's very important to kind of understand it. And look, the minister will say, because they're repealing the kind of parent legislation, which is to make sure to progress, that it's kind of progressing the primary sector commitments. But my view is that instead of repealing that section altogether, that if the minister, and I accept the minister's word on good faith, that they're intending to kind of progress the kind of move to progress on-farm agricultural emissions by 2030, instead of repealing that section altogether, why not change it so that the Climate Change Commission has a role in monitoring and reporting on the progress of the government's initiatives to price on-farm emissions by 2030? Because, if we are serious about if the government is truly serious about their commitments to actually price on-farm emissions by 2030, then surely having an independent monitor will actually be better for that. And if you look at the other aspects of the Commission's function, they're consistent with that. So Section 5JA is about reviewing the 2050 targets and, if necessary, recommending changes. Section 5JB is about providing advice that will enable the Minister to prepare emissions budgets. And the subsequent powers also provide the Minister with powers to either change the emissions budgets or to report progress on the emissions reduction plan, or to monitor progress, or also to take action on national adaptation risk assessments or climate change framework. So to my mind, yes, we may be repealing the kind of parent legislation which this Section 5JHA is currently looking after. So my question to the Minister is, would he consider a sort of Green Party amendment that changes that so that it instead looks after the progress of monitoring the government's progress to price on-farm emissions by 2030. If that is if that is what the right policy mix that the government feels is, I'm sure I'll be able to get my colleagues to support that, and we can have a blue-green deal across this House. We don't need, none of the other parties need to vote for it. I hope they vote for it, of course, but very interested in the Minister's views on that particular section. Thank you.
The Honourable Simon Wright.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the member's sales pitch in regards to Section 5JHA. I don't know how to say this, but I'll get straight to the point. The answer will be no. I will not be supporting that amendment. Appreciate that it's late on a Thursday, but that's not going to happen. The reason is that the Climate Change Commission has actually delivered that advice, and therefore the function is no longer required as part of that law, and therefore the clause is coming out. So it's a reasonably simple answer in regards to that point.
Ryan Hamilton.
I move that debate on this question now closed.
Steve Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was nerve-wracking. I want to pick up on something that the Minister said earlier. Minister, you alluded to the truth that nitrous oxide emissions are largely associated with manure, and likewise we know methane, ruminant methane, is a byproduct of the natural process of rumination in ruminating animals, cows and sheep and the like. Nevertheless, the agricultural gases, as designated as agricultural gases, are methane and nitrous oxide. And that those gases are the big challenge we face in the agricultural sector in our country. My question is, even though there are processes that are causing those emissions that are as a consequence of our big clearance of forest and draining of wetland over the course of the last 200 years, and populating the lowlands with pasture and dairy cows and sheep and beef and the like, the fact remains that those land uses are contributing to climate change. So my question is the Minister agnostic about land use? Because, no pun intended, agnostic about land use, because it seems to me that was it that the Canterbury Plains in the last 30 years hadn't converted so much of its land to dairying, reduced its arable production, and likewise Southland, produced a lot more things like barley and oats in the day. If these were farm gate profitable industries that could be utilising that land, that would solve the problem of the emissions of nitrous oxide to some extent, because obviously if they're still using fertiliser, there'd still be nitrous oxide, but they would solve the problem of the emissions of methane and still be profitable means of producing nutrition for human bodies in the agricultural sector. Surely the point of emissions pricing on those potent greenhouse gases, methane and nitrous oxide, superheating gases essentially, is to incentivise things like land use change, is to incentivise more arable production or more cropping or more vegetable growing, more plant-based production, more agroforestry, because there's a message being sent that the problem of methane and nitrous oxide predominantly from livestock is an issue. The concern for me in this question is that the implication is that this government is not agnostic about land use, that it is fiercely defending specific forms of farming, specific forms of pastoral farming that are high emitting. Because where is the pushback from those other sectors of our agricultural industry who do not emit methane, who do not emit high amounts of nitrous oxide, who in fact are being encouraged by a pricing system that makes it clear that those are a problem for us in terms of climate change? And to give an example of the challenge, simply because most of nitrate leachate, which is a problem for fresh water contamination and drinking water contamination, simply because most of it comes from dairy cow urine, doesn't mean we don't worry about it, because it's a risk to human health. Of course, we still have to deal with the problem of nitrate leachate, even though it is part of a biological process in dairy cows. So that's my primary question, and it's an important question of clarification, Minister. Are you agnostic about land use change, or is this simply about fiercely defending a specific kind of land use, i.e. pastoral livestock farming?
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Well, I'll tell the member that I've spent a long time agonising in regards to the question and the points that the members raised, but it's not within the scope of this bill.
Carlos Strong.
I move that debate on this question now close.
Francisco Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I really want to hear some new material.
Oh, this will be fresh material that I'm conjuring up straight right now. I'm asking questions around Clause 32 in Schedule 2, which covers Schedule 2 of the proposed transitional arrangements. My question is that clause seems to be about the people whose participants who've already registered for the scheme and who are and essentially making sure that they can cease to participate under the Act. So what the information that I would like from the Minister is how many people does this current schedule actually affect? Because there have been a lot of early interest in registering to be part of the scheme, for instance. Does it affect a lot of people? And I would like to, I guess, return to the questions that I've already asked that the Minister still hasn't addressed yet around the cost-benefit analysis. Was there cost-benefit analysis done on the other proposals? Because there was a cost-benefit analysis done on the status quo. Was there a cost-benefit analysis done on the other proposals? And there were 3 of them in the legislation. We would be very interested on this side of the House to actually find out whether the kind of policy options that the minister is pursuing is suboptimal to the outcome we're seeking, because the sort of multi-criteria analysis essentially shows that the status quo option is equal to option 1, which is the minister's preferred option, and option 3, which is the deferred processor level pricing, but option 2, which is the ongoing reporting requirements, is the one with the 2 minuses after it. So I'm curious to see if there was cost-benefit analysis done on the other measures, which is the option 1, the complete removal, and option 2, the ongoing reporting requirements, or option 3, or whether there was just analysis done on the status quo, because that seems to be not evidence-based policy if we're just evaluating the status quo and not comparing the relativity of the options, because the cost-benefit analysis shows that it does have a positive cost-benefit ratio of 1.24 or 113 without the premium for carbon action. So I think this is a really important question, and I would also like to find out about the question around Schedule 2, because I think it's important if we're measuring how many people are actually affected by that provision if it was actually necessary in the first place. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Carlos Chong.
Debate to that question now close.
The question is that debate on this question now close. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed to. The question is that Steve Abel's tabled amendment to delete clause 5 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The noes have it. A party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The motion is not agreed to. The question is that Steve Abel's tabled amendment to delete clause 7 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Aye. The noes have it. The party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed to. The question is that Steve Abel's tabled amendment to delete clause 14 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. The party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The motion is not agreed to. The question is that Steve Abel's tabled amendment to delete clauses 32, 33 and 34 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. The party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49 and the noes are 68. The motion is not agreed to. Steve Abel's tabled amendment to retain the agricultural component in the definition of eligible activity is out of order as being inconsistent with the objects and principles of the bill. Steve Abel's tabled amendment to retain reporting requirements for farmers to report on their emissions is out of order as being inconsistent with the objects and principles of the bill. Steve Abel's tabled amendment to retain reporting requirements for agricultural processors to report on their emissions is out of order as being inconsistent with the objects and principles of the bill. Steve Abel's tabled amendment to retain requirements for farmers to surrender emissions units is out of order as being inconsistent with the objects and principles of the bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. A party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Party Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed to. Members, we now come to Part 2. Part 2, this is a debate on clauses 35 to 39, consequential revocations and amendments to other legislation. The question is that Part 2 stand part.
Mr Chair.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. Part 2 relates to a narrow aspect in regards to revoking two pieces of secondary legislation that will be made redundant on the commencement date of this bill, and they relate to agricultural obligations.
The Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you, Mr Chair. This goes back to a discussion we're having in Part 1, but it is of course relevant for Part 2 as well, because as the Minister just set out, this does relate to regulations relating to removing now all the references to agriculture that's been taken out of the ETS. But of course, as we were just discussing in Part 1, and this is relevant to Part 2, it's going beyond the methane emissions of agriculture, because of course it also includes synthetic fertilisers. And we see that at clause 37, where in fact the words synthetic fertilisers are looking at me in bold, Mr Chair, from the bill in front of me. So that is that in clause 3, revoke the definitions of calf, cow, heifer, milk solids, slaughter point, all sound maybe quite related to animals, synthetic fertiliser containing nitrogen, and vela. And I probably pronounced that wrong. But Mr Speaker, this point about synthetic fertilisers that we haven't had answered by the Minister is that he said that 3.8% of our emissions are from nitrous oxide relating to synthetic fertilisers. Why do they need to be removed from the ETS? The Minister said, well, because the other nitrous oxide is related to ruminants and ruminant things that come from ruminants. How do I be polite about that? But because that other nitrous oxide relates to ruminants, then that should be bundled together with the methane that comes from ruminants. However, as my colleague Francisco Hernandez has been saying, that's not how methane is treated, that you have methane from waste being treated quite separately, and he will know the number off the top of his head. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it is, I think it is, might be around 7%. 3.8% is still a lot. And if we can get rid of 3.8%, then we should, because a lot of time and effort goes into reducing that methane by quite small increments, and every increment counts. So I'd again invite the Minister to explain how his logic works for that 3.8% relating to fertiliser use of nitrous oxide, whereas it doesn't relate to other gases that are separated out into other industries, regardless of whether or not they're related to the same gas. So the point being, methane often related to ruminants, but also related to landfills, but is treated separately, and that the landfills are still in the ETS and they're not being removed, despite the fact that methane is also related to ruminants. So the logic just doesn't seem to be there. And beyond that point, this 3.8% relating to synthetic fertilisers is something that we should be aiming to remove from our system, and we should be using the polluter pays principle for it. And that again was another question that I asked in the part one debate, which was, does he agree with the logic of his ACT colleagues and a member of the executive that in fact the market is the only thing that should determine farmer behaviour, and that seems to be a total abrogation of the polluter pays principle. And I haven't heard that from the National Party before, that the polluter pays principle is something that they want to get rid of. And as I've mentioned before, we do keep saying that the ETS is the main instrument that the government wants to rely on. They've got rid of those complementary policies. So it seems an about face to suddenly say, well, the polluter pays doesn't now apply to these emissions. Also appreciate the Minister confirming the MFE numbers of over 50% of emissions being from agriculture. And what I would like him to confirm is that is National Party's position, and they don't question that because members from his party were questioning that the other night.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Thanks very much to the member for the question. It is correct that 3.8% of total agricultural emissions come from fertiliser, nitrous oxide from synthetic fertiliser. Our view in regards to, and this was included in the draft emissions reduction plan, is that there is already a number of technology innovations in play and already being utilised by farmers in regards to synthetic fertiliser, and the reductions of emissions in regards to that and the uptake in regards to that is progressing already without any incentives by government in order to achieve that. We do take a market-based approach in regards to that, and as I've noted already and is included in the draft emissions reduction plan, the current status quo in terms of the trajectory of emissions reduction for methane in particular is on track in regards to our 2030 target.
Scott Willis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm rise to speak to part two, and I'm particularly interested in hearing from the Minister about our proposed amendment, wondering whether the Minister would consider our amendment related to clause 37, page 7, line 5, where we propose to delete clause 37, page 7, lines 5 to 7. This is simply, well, I'm aware that the Minister is placing a lot of faith in the magic bullet approach to agricultural emissions and in unproven technologies, and we are concerned that by shutting the door to ensuring that we can reduce agricultural emissions through the ETS, that we are not going to be able to meet our commitments. And I'm also very aware that I've got a sheep at home that need sharing at the moment, and I don't want us to fill up a lot of time when we could be doing more useful things. But this amendment paper amends the Climate Change Response Emissions Trading Scheme Agricultural Obligations Amendment Bill to retain references to definitions related to agricultural activity in the Climate Change General Exemptions Order 2009, including calf, cow, heifer, milk solids, slaughter point, synthetic fertilisers containing nitrogen and vela. And it supports retaining a legislative framework including definitions to enable agricultural emissions pricing at a later date. And the reason why this is important is that if we don't meet our emissions targets, the country is going to be in for a huge bill. In a future, government will be responsible and the population will suffer. So what we're asking for is an amendment containing, retaining reference to all of those aforementioned terms, definitions as follows: calf, so male or female bovine under 12 months of age and weighing less than 40 kgs at the slaughter point; cow, meaning a female bovine with more than 6 months permanent teeth; heifer means a female bovine with no more than 6 permanent teeth, etc. And this, I mean, it seems like a very simple thing that we could do to ensure that we're not while the bill may pass, we're not cutting off options in the future. We're ensuring that we have an ability to do this at a future point when there's a need. So my request to the Minister is he willing to consider this amendment, to think about what we can do and whether there might be a change of heart at a certain point, whether there might be a sense of regret as we see the world turning towards conspiracy theories and climate denial, and an actual approach that is going to help us reduce emissions, agricultural emissions, while supporting our farmers to do the right thing, while providing the carrot through jobs for nature, through the ability to support farmers who have lower intensive practices, through ensuring that we support regenerative agriculture. So if we come back, Minister, to the definitions, what would be really helpful is if we retain those. So if we're coming back to clause 37 and delete clause 37, pages 7, lines 5 to 7, that enables us to ensure that we're not simply stopping here. We've got options into the future. I'd appreciate the Minister considering this amendment, and a response would be appreciated.
Yeah, thanks very much. To the member, no, we won't be accepting that amendment. It's not helpful. It's not helpful because agriculture isn't going to stay within the ETS. So why would you leave clauses in there in that regard when that is not the intent? And actually that is a consensus intent by not just the government, but actually opposition were also in that position in regards to taking the agricultural elements out of the ETS.
Honourable David Parker.
Mr Chairman, the clause 35.1 in part 2 revokes the Climate Change Agricultural Sector Regulations 2010. Those regulations were put in place by the last national government. They were amended once, but they were there in order to have the information base for the future should there be a emissions obligation at the processor level. I've previously, in an earlier contribution on part 1, explained why I have thought that it is silly to require every farmer to report their emissions. It's an unnecessary administrative burden. It doesn't change the outcome very much. Much better to have a processor level obligation, which is a lot more efficient administratively, with volunteers being rewarded and the bulk of the price signal flowing through from the processor based on reporting at the processor level. Of course, the Climate Change Agricultural Sector Regulations 2010 form the basis for that reporting of the emissions at the processor level, and I have those opened on my device here at the moment. And Regulation 9 of the Climate Change Agricultural Sector Regulations 2010 is the one that says that a participant who in a year carries out an activity of dairy processing of milk must record the total quantity of tonnes of milk solids and report it. I'm sure that the systems that are in place by the processors at the moment are very simple. It's not a very onerous task for them to continue doing that for the 2 years or 3 years that the Minister has allowed himself to rejig emissions pricing by the date that he's promised there to be some form of agricultural emissions. The cost-benefit analysis in the regulatory impact statement makes no reference to the cost, so far as on my reading of it, as to the cost that is being imposed by those regulations on processes that have been there for over a decade, given the, which I think is a logical assumption to make, that one of the possible outcomes of a future system is to actually, for the majority of people, collect things at the processor level rather than requiring expensive and time-consuming reporting, which annoys farmers and is unnecessary, seems to me to be not justified by the Minister to revoke those regulations at this stage. And so I would like the Minister to inform the House what information he has as to the cost that this existing regulation imposes on those processes in the intervening period in order for the House to assess whether it's wise to revoke that regulation. I have an amendment in my name that I'm about to table that moves that clause 35, paragraph 1 be deleted.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the member formerly from Dunedin, and also the member from Dunedin, Scott Willis, and the member for Dunedin, Rachel Brooking, for their excellent contributions. It's good to get the from and for right when the list and electorate MP distinction is in place. Look, I just wanted to point out that this regulation that David Parker has referred to was actually a regulation that was formed under the Key government. And by the way that this government is going, it seems like that was the last national government that actually cared about climate change, at least enough to actually bother measuring their emissions. I mean, because as David Parker has already said, the Honourable David Parker's already said, there's actually no requirement. When this bill was passed, there was no, when this regulation was made, there was no requirement for agriculture to be in the emissions trading scheme at a processor level or otherwise. So these regulations essentially just enable measurements of them. And if we're actually serious about meeting our nationally determined contributions, measurement is the first step. If you're not measuring it, how can you manage it? And also importantly, it sets a baseline for emissions factors that other emissions inventories potentially rely on. So there's a danger that if we actually scrap this regulation, that it might have implications for climate reporting if we're removing an aspect of a regulation that other kind of legislative process might rely on. The unintended consequence might be to actually, in some way, delay the progress of reporting or monitoring. And that leads on to a related question, which I'm hoping to ask which I was hoping to ask the Minister in part one, but I didn't get the chance to.
We'll stick to part two, please.
Yes, but it's related to part two.
If it's related in part two, that's fine.
It's related to the way that we the way we measure emissions and the sort of accounting targets that we've got. So under the nationally determined contribution that we have, which agricultural emissions is a part of, we counted in the previous nationally determined contribution, we sort of measured some level of contribution from the agricultural sector to that nationally determined contribution. So my question is, with the repeal of the requirement to report, well, and also with the repeal of the requirement to do anything at all other than rely on, I guess, the technological mitigation and the methane inhibitors, which the second emissions reduction plan is counting on, is there a concern that by repealing all these mechanisms that there's a further emissions gap that's been opened in the nationally determined contribution? Because even under all the actions of the previous government, there was already an emissions gap between the domestic action and the nationally determined contribution, which would have had to be met with, with potentially international credits. Now, with the repeal of these regulations to measure and with the repeal of these regulations to take action, has it opened a further emissions gap? And has there been any kind of quantification done to see what the impact of opening up that further emissions gap might be? Because, as you're well aware of, as you're the Minister of Climate Change, policy proposals are required to undergo a CIPA, a Climate Impact Policy Assessment. I mean, obviously, this is legislation. There's also policy proposals, so maybe we should start doing climate impact policy assessments for legislations as well. It's relevant. It's all relevant. It's all connected in some way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, conjuring. It's everywhere. Yeah, I'm a conjurer. So, yes, my question is, why repeal a legislation that was actually set up during a previous national government, the key government, which was just set up to enable participants to actually measure their emissions and report on them. It's a reporting framework. I understand, fair enough, you're repealing 35.2 that actually does require participants, that actually does mandate participants to take part in the ETS. So I understand why you're appealing that. Can you do that? Thank you.
Honourable Simon Watts, did you say you wanted
Madam
to
Chair.
Oh, you didn't. Vanessa Wenig.
I move that debate on
Madam
this
Chair,
question now close.
The question is that debate on this question now close. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. A party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk, conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT, New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Steve Abel's tabled amendment to delete clause 35 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. A party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
ACT, New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes. The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The motion is not agreed. The question is that Honourable David Parker's tabled amendment to delete clause 35(1) be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. A party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
ACT, New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The motion is not agreed. The question is that Steve Abel's tabled amendment to delete clause 37 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
ACT, New Zealand.
11 opposed. New Zealand first.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The motion is not agreed. Steve Abel's tabled amendments to delete Part 2 are out of order as being a direct negation of the question. The question is that Part 2 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT, New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand first.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. We now come to Schedule 1 with no debate. Steve Abel's tabled amendments to Schedule 1 are out of order as being inconsistent with the objects and principles of the bill. The question is that Schedule 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. A party vote has been called for. The clerk will please conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT, New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand first.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. We come to Schedule 2 with no debate. Steve Abel's tabled amendment to Schedule 2 is out of order as being inconsistent with the previous decision of the committee. The question is that Schedule 2 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. A party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT, New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand first.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. Members, we now come to our final debate, Clauses 1 and 2. This is the debate on Clause 1 and 2, title and commencement.
Madam Chair.
Honourable Rachel Brookham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to focus on Clause 1, which is the title clause. And as we know, this Act is the Climate Change Response Emission Trading Scheme Agricultural Obligations Amendment Act 2024. And my colleague here is just saying no response. And that, I think, would be a better title, Madam Chair. But I want to reflect on the discussions we've just had during the debates on Part 1 and Part 2 and going back into the second reading as well that we've just had this week. This bill is progressing quickly. As we talk about, Madam Speaker, I will be speaking about the title clause.
That's good.
Clause 1, in fact. And so one of that is that some suggested changes, and I'm focusing here on the brackets, the removing emissions trading scheme agricultural obligations to some different phrases which I think might be more useful to describe what it is that this bill is doing. And the first one would be the abrogation of the polluter pays principle, Madam Chair, and that is because of the non-response we had from the Minister regarding whether or not he was going to disagree with his ACT coalition partners, that in fact it's fine just to leave everything up to the market. Another Another suggestion in that bracketed area is, of course, might be this act is the climate change response brackets. We're totally relaxed because the first emissions budget looks like it's going to be okay, close brackets, Amendment Act 2024, because of course the Minister hasn't responded to my questions either regarding the second and third budgets, which we know the Climate Change Commission is worried about. They've expressed the risk about it, and it seems like many members of this House think that everything is on track and it's totally fine, when of course what this government is doing is taking us backwards. Now, another suggestion is that those bracketed, the title in clause 1, the brackets could be replaced with removing agriculture despite agreeing that this makes up over 50% of our emissions, Madam Chair. And I referenced that. And look, it's interesting that Simon Court has just said some people say. And I would remind Simon Court that, of course, the Minister has just stood up and agreed, or he seemed to agree. He didn't. He could have been more forceful in his statements, and I invite him to again give some force to that statement that whilst the MFE website says something like 53%, that he is totally committed to agreeing that yes, agricultural emissions do make up at least or around 50% of our emissions, because we've just heard the member from ACT interject, and we heard a national member in the second reading, Miles Anderson, say, and I'm quoting from the draft Hansard, but I would like to point out, I'm on the www.parliament website here, but I would like to point out that we consistently get told that 50% of our emissions are from farming, but that's a gross target based on what is now considered to be poor science. So why I've been asking the Minister about that is, does he agree with his colleagues from the National Party that that is based on poor science and that somehow we should be thinking about agriculture in a different way?
Should be the title of the bill?
I'm suggesting that the title should be the Climate Change Response, brackets, removing agriculture despite agreeing that it makes up over 50% of our emissions, close brackets, Amendment Act 2024. Another title could be included in those brackets, the removal of incentive of a backstop, close bracket, could be in the brackets, no plan yet for pricing, close brackets. We've heard from the Minister that there's an intention for something in 2030 by 2030, but provides no certainty. That could be another name for it. This climate change response, no certainty for farmers about what is going to happen, close brackets. Or as my colleague Damien O'Connor suggested in the second reading debate, the kicking the can down the road.
Madam Chair.
Steve Abel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When, Madam Chair, the Luxon government says it believes in climate change and then does all the things to make climate change worse, it has the same effect as if it did not believe in climate change in the first place, which speaks to what I am about to propose, which is an amendment to the title. Pardon me, Mr. Court? Excuse me. This is
about title, Mr.
The Minister,
Court, and Mr. Abel's going to suggest a title.
I'm going to suggest a title. So, the gentleman to my left, Simon Court, has just said that this is making the emissions reduction plan better, but explicitly it is not doing that. It is taking out agriculture from the emissions trading scheme. And so my amendment is to quite factually describe what the title of the bill should be. The Act is currently called the Climate Change Response Emissions Trading Scheme Agricultural Obligations Amendment Bill. But there will no longer be agricultural obligations. So it's utterly incorrect to call it that, because it's explicitly taking out agricultural obligations.
He's right.
Therefore, it should be called the Climate Change Response Agricultural Emissions Climate Delay Amendment Act 2024. It could have just as readily been called Climate Delay and Denial, because we know that delaying action on climate change has the same effect as denying action on climate change. If you know there is a problem and you do nothing about it, it has the same effect as if you didn't notice there was a problem. So I put forward any of those titles for consideration, but I do really note, and would like the Minister's view on it, that the current description of the legislation is actually really quite inaccurate. And that is a problem, because surely it should say, in the words of the great Grant Robertson, it should say on the tin what it is. And it is not this, because it is not the emissions trading scheme agricultural obligations. It is about removing the obligations. Thank you.
Point of order. Point of order.
A point of order, Francisco Hernandez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just calling a point of order to seek guidance from you about the title clause. It's always a danger for fresh MPs to just read this straight away to seek guidance. But the Speaker's ruling seems to suggest 127 that when debating the preliminary clause at the end, members should have some latitude to summarise and make concluding remarks about the issues they've raised during the committee's consideration of the bill. So is that right, or have I misinterpreted?
The latitude is not huge. It's a small part of the bill, and they may refer back to where it came from, but we don't want relitigation of parts 1 and part 2 all over again.
Thank you for your guidance, Madam Chair.
Honourable Barbara Edmonds.
Good to be able to take a call on the Climate Change Response Emissions Trading Scheme Agriculture Obligations Amendment Bill, the title and commencement. And Madam Chair, my suggestion for an amendment to change the title of the bill, it should be read Climate Change Response, brackets, Making New Zealand Exports More Expensive Amendment Bill. And the reason why I suggest that title change is whether people in the House or outside of this House believe in climate change or not, there are a number of international obligations which the Minister has clearly set out in responses to different questions that New Zealand has signed up to. As part of that response to those climate obligations, countries around the world are requiring supply chains, customers, other businesses to track the emissions and the amount of carbon that has been used to make that product or service in order to fulfil their climate change obligation reporting requirements. So the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee, which didn't necessarily review this particular bill, but actually as part of its banking inquiry, one of the key aspects that members of the Select Committee, and this is all public, have been asking the banks about is around the climate change obligations that they have to fulfil as part of those reporting obligations. Yesterday we had Rabobank in front of the Select Committee, and Rabobank talked about one of the papers that they had drafted as a series of different white papers to help their customers adapt to these climate change obligations. One of their papers, which they recently published earlier this year, was called Maintaining Our Emissions Edge. And as part of that research paper, some of the feedback that they got from when they surveyed their customers, a number of them being farmers, was that they saw relief in having a breather from the regulatory changes under the previous government. They were confident that this new government was going to give them a chance to have a breath. However, what that report actually said was, be careful about that breather, because they referenced a Chapman-Tripp report which showed that 80% of the exports from New Zealand to international markets require climate change reporting obligations. And so part of the issue that surrounds this particular why this bill and why I think that the title should be changed is because whether you do it now or you repeal it and you do it later, the fact is it's going to make it more expensive and actually in some ways potentially a risk for some of our exporters, because the big companies overseas, such as the Nestle's, such as the Tesco's, They are requiring our New Zealand producers of goods and services that are exported to at least be able to trace what is their footprint. And if it fits what they have as part of their requirements, then they'll basically import them from wherever they are in the world. So that's why I believe this climate change response bill should be changed to making New Zealand exports more expensive bill, because ultimately, if New Zealand exporters cannot meet those international obligations to help their customers, it's going to impinge on their ability to export the volumes or at the value in which New Zealand exporters need and want. So therefore, Madam Speaker, that is my suggestion for this. I haven't been part of the deliberation on this bill. However, both with the Reserve Bank this morning, actually to that member, the Reserve Bank this morning also, as part of the Financial Stability Report, also mentioned it as a particular risk. And the reason why it's a particular risk is part of when they surveyed the banks, 7 of the 13 condescending. I heard there's Remain saying really condescending. I'm just trying to say what the Reserve Bank was talking about this morning in the Financial Stability Report. And of that, 7 of the 13 banks that responded to the survey said geopolitical risks and tensions overseas were of a concern for them. So therefore, I believe this bill title does need to change to reflect that. I appreciate the government is going to come in with their new changes at a later date. However, it leaves a vacuum here in which you hope they do. For our New Zealand exporters, I hope they do. Because whether we like it or not here in New Zealand, the rest of the world has these climate obligations which they require as part of their corporate reporting standards. There's further changes that need to be made, but that is my suggestion to changing the title of this bill.
Mike Butterick.
Question now closed.
Excuse me, I cannot hear what Mr Butterick is saying.
I move that debate on this question now closed.
I have a point of order from Tangi Utikere.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I refer to Speaker's Ruling 68(1). This relates to when closure motions are currently before the committee. And while I certainly accept that it is over to the purview of the chairperson to rule on that, the ruling by Chairperson Mallard in 2015 does make it very clear around when it is likely for closure motions are to be accepted, referencing the...
Can I just point out to the member that I haven't actually accepted the closure motion at this point?
No. I was just going to indicate, Madam Chair, that the Minister has not engaged on this particular issue yet. There have been a number of issues that have been raised, and I know that part of the timing of taking the point of order is if you were minded to accept a closure motion. I was wanting to indicate that the Minister had still not taken any course.
Thank you for that point of order. Speaking to the point of order, Tim Costley.
Madam Chair, I believe that Speaker's ruling only applies in the case that they are non-political contributions from the other side, and I would suggest that they've been incredibly political, and so the Minister's engagement or lack of has been entirely appropriate.
Well, just on the point of order and the response to the point of order, it is totally up to the Minister whether the Minister takes a response or not. Lan Farm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the title clause, and that's because of the absolute significance of this bill. Now, I want to pick up firstly on the fact that the title claims to be a climate change response, and the response that comes to mind when it comes to the actual content of the bill and the fact that it is removing agriculture from the ETS is there's this Austin Powers movie where there's a steamroller from way far away and there's a henchman who just screams and screams for minutes while the steamroller slowly but surely crushes him. And I think why I say that is because I want to propose a title clause for this bill, and it's the Climate Change Response Emissions Trading Scheme Agricultural Obligations Global Climate Trainwreck Amendment Bill. Now, I'm picking up the comments from across the House that, you know, we don't want anything in this debate to be overly political. The problem is when it comes to climate change is that it's so serious and so severe in terms of us needing to really clearly take actions when it comes to climate change that it feels that the only way we can actually get some attention on the issue and traction with people understanding the magnitude and the severity of it is to draw, you know, distinctions to more political things. And I wanted to suggest the train wreck part of it because we know trains, they're really fast and they cause a lot of damage when they crash. But in order for them to actually do that, someone needs to have set the tracks. And this is exactly what this bill is doing with the framework in terms of taking out agriculture from the ETS. Now, what was so clear at Environment Select Committee today was we actually had the Climate Commission come in and they talked about their first monitoring report when it comes to emissions and where New Zealand is at with their emissions. Now, they, you know, positively gave us the news that we've heard before that emissions have actually dropped in recent years. It was a 4.2% drop in 2022. And this was mostly due to changes in energy and industry sectors. But they really stressed the significant risks to the second and third budgets. And this is primarily, as they pointed out, with agriculture and transport sectors. These are showing the largest risks. This is in their words. And they said in the absence of pricing mechanisms or any incentives, these provide headwinds to genuine emissions reduction. And they stressed how urgent this was. They stressed how we really need to look at every part of every sector if we are really going to meet our emissions obligations and the ones that this government have so clearly stated that they are committed to. So the Climate Change Response Emissions Trading Scheme, Agricultural Obligations, Global Climate Trainwreck Amendment Bill, I'd love to hear from the Minister if he would consider that title. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Tom Rutherford.
Move that debate on this question now close.
The question is that debate on this question now close. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Steve Abel's tabled amendment to replace emissions trading scheme agricultural obligations with agricultural emissions climate delay be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. The party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
ACT New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The motion is not agreed. The question is that clause 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. A party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed. Oh, 49 votes in favour, sorry.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act.
11 in favour.
New Zealand
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Steve Abel's amendment to change the commencement date to 31st of December 2029 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The motion is not agreed. The question is that Clause 2 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it.
Noes have it. Party vote.
Party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk, conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Ngā poti kao.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. I will note that there is no point in looking to the chair for guidance when one cannot remember which way one is voting, because there won't be any guidance coming from this chair. I will report this bill without amendment presently. Now we'll just have a chance to change over the ministers and the chair. Right, members, this feels a little bit like we've been several times here. Deja vu, that's it, Mr Rutherford. Members, we now come to further consideration of the Contracts of Insurance Bill. When we were last considering the bill, we were debating Part 7. Part 7 is the debate on Clause 169 to 193, repeals and amendments to other acts, and Schedules 4 to 6. Once again, the question is that Part 7 stand part. The question is that the Minister's amendments to Part 7 set out on AP number 125 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. A party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk, conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Part 7 as amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. A party vote has been called. Please, Clerk, conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumārima ngā poti.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Schedule 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it.
Party vote.
A party vote is being called for. Please, Clerk, conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
$49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumārima ngā poti kao.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Schedule 2 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. The noes have it. The party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumārima ngā poti kao.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand
8
First.
votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Schedule 3 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote is being called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumārima ngā poti kao.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand
8
First.
votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that the Minister's amendments to Schedule 4 set out on AP number 125 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote is being called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand
8
First.
votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Schedule 4 as amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote is being called for. Please, Clerk, conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that the Minister's amendments to Schedule 5 set out on AP number 125 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act, New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand
8
First.
votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Schedule 5 as amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act, New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand
8
First.
votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Schedule 6 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act, New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. Members, we now come to our final debate, clauses 1 and 2. This is the debate on title and commencement. The question is that clause 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. A party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk, conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act, New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand
8
First.
votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Honourable Dr Duncan Webb's tabled amendment replacing clause 2 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
Act, New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The motion is not agreed. The question is that Honourable Dr Duncan Webb's tabled amendment to subclause 2 of clause 2 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
Act, New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand
8
First.
votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The motion is not agreed. The question is that clause 2 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no.
No.
The ayes have it.
Noes have it.
The party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
You stand up and I'll call your name.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Sorry, Barbara. This is the question on clause 2. It's the only part, isn't it?
This is clause 2. Yeah, clause 2 standing part.
Okay, so we've had Green Party in saying aye, saying no. Should we start this again?
Yes, could we please start that vote again? The clerk has some queries, so we'll call. I haven't actually declared the vote, but there's a couple of queries. It wasn't just one, so we're going to start again. Please, Clerk. The question is that clause 2 stand part.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand
8
First.
votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed.
Madam Chair.
Honourable Andrew Bailey.
Madam Chair, I move that amendment paper 126 dividing the bill.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. The party vote has been called for. Please be careful how you vote this time, because 2 people mixed it up last time.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. I will report this bill with amendment and so divided.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, fair enough. Andy, did you want to take it, bring it on home? Yeah. Touche.
Sorry, I'm anyway.
That's okay.
I'm ahead of myself, I think.
Are you okay? You okay? I didn't hear any objections, so I stood up and now I'm on my feet. So I'm very happy that you were happy. I picked that up quite I picked that up quite a bit this afternoon, actually. We are going to have a situation sometime soon in the House where we're going to have some corrected votes because there's been quite a bit of it this afternoon. It's all recorded in the Hansard, Mr. McAnulty. I'm not sure if it's an allegation as such. You can ask for that to be recorded in the Hansard. It's still live.
Needs to.
Point of order, Kieran McAnulty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we report progress.
That motion, I put the motion to the House that we report progress. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The motion is agreed. I will report progress. Thank you, Mr. McAnulty. We may actually have to get, oh, here he is. Is he coming? You have to say the House is resumed.
The House is resumed.
Oh, hang on. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the committee has considered the Climate Change Response Emissions Trading Scheme Agricultural Obligations Amendment Bill and reports it without amendment. The committee has further considered the Contracts of Insurance Bill and reports it with amendment and divided into the following bills: Contracts of Insurance Bill, Contracts of Insurance Repeals and Amendments Bill. The committee has also considered the Buildings Earthquake-Prone Building Deadlines and Other Matters Amendment Bill and reports it has made no progress on the bill. Mr. Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The Climate Change Response Emissions Trading Scheme Agricultural Obligations Amendment Bill and the Contract of Insurance Bill are set down for third reading next sitting day. The Building Earthquake-Prone Building Deadlines and Other Matters Amendment Bill is set down for further consideration in committee stage and set down for third reading next sitting day. The House stands adjourned until 11:30 a.m. on Tuesday, 12th of November.